The man made just one burger, and it was enough to win over the world's greatest tyrant. To taste his food, the mighty black dragon even chose to become his part-time worker. You see, when El first arrived in this world, he discovered that not only was the food awful, but it was also nearly impossible to swallow. If I could open a restaurant here, it'd be a hit. Becoming a chef was his only dream. But then, war broke out. Young men had to join the army to fight the black dragon. Talk about bad luck. When it rains, it pours. He couldn't even drink water without it getting stuck in his teeth. I swear, a truck should just run me over already, he thought. But soon, his magical talent was recognized, and he was placed in the mage squad. And like knights, mages didn't have to be on the front lines, fighting and killing. With nothing but his dream in hand, he stuck it out. 15 years later, he finally retired. Draketown was where he planned to start fresh. Together with the friends he'd made in the army, he opened a restaurant. One day, he called out to a woman passing by and, tearfully, asked if there was a shop nearby. After some polite conversation, he learned her name was Rain, the owner of a shop not far from there. She then recommended her husband's store, just down the road. At the same time, Rain warned Elle that her husband had a bit of a temper. But after meeting such a kind and friendly woman, Elle figured her husband couldn't be that bad, right? Wrong. When he finally met the man, he was so nervous he couldn't speak. It turned out the owner mistook him for a vendor from another shop. Furious, the man yelled, "Did you buy this meat at a cheap price, only to resell it at double the cost before it spoils?" Elle was stunned. "I just got here." At that moment, a frying pan slammed down on his head. The angry owner immediately lost all his bravado. He then asked Elle if he wanted baron meat. Elle nodded eagerly. To Elle's surprise, the grumpy owner was actually afraid of his friendly wife. Caught in the middle, Elle thought, "I just want to go home." Under the frying pan's authority, the owner had no choice but to go fetch the meat. He even apologized, telling Elle he used to be a soldier, but after being betrayed by a comrade, he'd become like this. As the owner brought the meat over, he told Elle to show him his skills. He thought the baron meat was top quality. Only if Elle impressed him would he continue to supply it. Otherwise, forget about getting even a scrap of fat. Let's see what kind of delicious dish you can make. Before he could finish, the frying pan hit him again. Rain gestured for Elle to ignore the owner's conditions. Though they were tough, Elle still agreed to the deal, and invited the couple to come try his food at his restaurant later that evening. With a confident smile, he walked off. In this world, the names of livestock and animals are completely different from what he knew back home. Cows are called Yuka, chickens are called Belenko, wolves are called Baron, and pigs are called Yuba. Baron meat is considered a luxury ingredient, while the most affordable meat is pork. However, the locals don't appreciate the goodness of bacon. Considering the quality of the pork, roasting it is the only way to truly bring out its flavor. Before that, the meat needs to be scored in several places, so the marinade can soak in more evenly. During the roasting process, the moisture on the surface of the meat evaporates quickly, giving it a crispier texture. Who would have thought that a move capable of slaying monsters would be used to slice meat? Isn't that a bit overkill? Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Rain and her husband. Elle quickly told them to wait for a moment. Rain was praising the cleanliness of the restaurant, but Noel couldn't resist a bit of sarcasm. Seeing this, Rain silently pulled out a frying pan. Looks like the pan wasn't shiny enough. Meanwhile, Elle was preparing for the roast. Once the grill was heated, he lightly brushed a layer of oil on it. Since pork belly is quite fatty, he had to be careful with the oil, or it would stick to the pan. When putting the meat on, he started with the skin side down. Otherwise, the skin would dry out before the inside had time to cook, making it harder to grill evenly. The sound of sizzling pork only added to the appetizing atmosphere. He fried the pig skin, adjusted the heat, then turned the skin so it would get some color. After sprinkling salt, he made sure the meat was thoroughly cooked, so the inside was evenly heated. Then, he cut it into convenient, bite-sized pieces. Next, he prepared a salad to go with the meal. Maybe the locals weren't used to eating with wraps, but the various vegetables and rich seasonings balanced the rich flavor of the roasted pork belly. Noel, being so meticulous, preferred avoiding unnecessary additions. Finally, the plate was ready. As the finishing touch, The salad and roasted pork belly were placed together. When the meat hit the table, Rain was already anticipating the taste. Let's see how L's cooking holds up. With just one bite, the crispy yuba meat exploded in his mouth, as if he were running across the plains. Is this really yuba meat? L nodded confidently. Of course. The rich aroma of the salad helped cut through the fat, and Rain was surprised by how well they paired. At the same time, she turned to Noel for his opinion. But by now, Noel's plate was already empty, and he said it wasn't enough. Far from it. He gestured for more. The next moment, a frying pan landed with a clang on his head. Is one frying pan enough? Noel softly muttered. Congrats, you passed the test. Just tell me what kind of meat you want, and I'll get you the best in the empire. L thanked Noel for his recognition, but right now, he was thinking, I want more roast meat. He then signaled for them to wait a moment. Meanwhile, the delicious aroma wafted into a young girl's room, and she was drawn to it like a magnet. Switching scenes. Ever since the restaurant opened a week ago, Al had been settling in smoothly. His restaurant had been getting rave reviews from the locals. Behind this success was the use of rare and expensive spices. But in this world, they were both rare and costly, so people couldn't afford to use them freely. Besides, the quality and variety of products here couldn't compare to what was available in the modern world. But Al had a way of getting them. He placed a gold coin in the center of the summoning circle, and after reciting a magic incantation, modern products appeared before his eyes. The summoning magic of this world allowed him to summon objects from the modern world. This was something L accidentally discovered while searching for a way back home. Although there were size and weight limits, it had proven to be a huge help. It also proved this was not a perfect spell, since it hadn't fulfilled its primary purpose, to send L back to his original world. Moreover, the food in the local grocery store would spoil unless it was processed, like fresh meat, eggs, or vegetables. The exact reason for this was unclear, and even though Al was a high-ranking mage, he could only summon once a day. At this moment, he was hoping to grab 2 bottles of beer to quench his thirst, but when he opened the fridge, it was completely empty. Al quickly figured out the culprit. With a clunk, he tapped his head. Lori then whipped out her cute attack. Al sighed in defeat. Drinking is fine, but at least clean up after yourself. That's the consequence of you not leaving me any food last time. As the great black dragon, how could she be bothered with chores? The next moment, there was another clang. Poverty can't move you, and neither can your majesty, Al thought. But now, the great black dragon had to bend a little. As she'd said, her true form was a black dragon. Al had found her after she became an orphan. She had lost her mother and her home in the Dragon War, though she had lived for hundreds of years. Having taken human form, she was still young by dragon standards. Maybe that's why she was still a bit immature. So Al decided to take her in, seeing how pitiful she looked. He promised to make her a steak burger. Just then, the bell rang again just as they were about to close for the night. It was Mr. Noel. He looked troubled, and the first thing he did upon entering was ask Al for a drink. And fortunately, the beers in the fridge were all gone, drunk by Lorraine. Luckily, Al had summoned a bottle of liquor today, but before long, Mr. Noel had finished it. Al immediately urged him to stop drinking, and under the influence of alcohol, Mr. Noel finally let his worries spill out. Upon hearing this, Al's heart jolted. What had happened? Mr. Noel then explained the situation. He had noticed that Rain would often dress up and go out at regular intervals. This had been going on for several months, so he decided to secretly follow her. To his surprise, Rain was meeting one of his old colleagues from his mercenary days, a man who was also Mr. Noel's closest comrade. After sharing this, Mr. Noel burst into tears, unsure of what to do next. Al, however, didn't think things were that simple. Although he had known Rain for only a short time, he was certain she wasn't the kind of person who would do something like that. Meanwhile, Lorraine was grumbling and working on something. Al signaled Lorraine to either join him outside or continue peeling. Lorraine, looking quite aggrieved, agreed. Soon, the two of them arrived at the place Mr. Noel had mentioned. Outside a restaurant, they found Mrs. Rain, sitting opposite a man who was most likely her colleague. To learn more about their situation, Al asked Lorraine to use spatial magic to eavesdrop on their conversation and promised him a beef burger as a reward. Lorraine, Ever the glutton immediately asked for two, and Elle happily agreed. From the conversation, Elle learned that the relationship between Rain and the man was nothing like Mr. Noel had imagined. It seemed there was a huge misunderstanding. After thinking for a moment, Elle suddenly appeared in front of the two of them. "Mr. Noel misunderstood you both," he said. Meanwhile, Mr. Noel, drunk and lying on the table, had no idea what was going on. When they saw him, he angrily picked up his fist and charged at his old comrade, but he made no effort to dodge. "I'll use the magic barrier to stop him. Let him hit you. But this problem won't be solved like that," Elle said. If you had told Mr. Noel that it was Man who lent him the money to open the meat shop, he would calm down. Upon hearing this, Mr. Noel froze, his fist hanging in the air. He stopped and looked at them, confused. Everyone sit down and talk things through. Considering Mr. Noel had drunk a lot, all suggested they needed to sober him up. Hot pot seemed like a perfect solution. Meanwhile, Rain revealed everything. When Mr. Noel was tricked into losing all his savings, it was Man who had lent the money to start the shop. Since directly lending the money would have caused Mr. Noel to refuse, Rain had lied, saying that a lord had helped recover the money. Elle interrupted them. "Why don't we eat and talk?" Hot pot with Bell and meat. After a simple try, they began reminiscing about the past. Despite the many years that had passed, it felt like just yesterday. Thanks to Elle's hot pot, the long-hidden secrets were finally shared, and the conflict was resolved. On the side, Lorraine was less than pleased. "I was promised to beat burgers." Elle gave a sheepish laugh, nearly forgetting. Just then, Ben stopped Elle. "I'd like to host an important guest here, as well as our mercenary group's gathering." Elle quickly agreed. A few days later, Elle had come up with a suitable menu. This wasn't chicken. It was an animal similar to chicken. The balenku in this world was considered a premium ingredient because of its incredible speed. It was so fast that even high-level mages like Elle couldn't catch it. So, he had to come up with another plan. He went to Mr. Noel's shop. Upon hearing that Elle wanted balenku meat, Noel was shocked. He told Elle that no one sold this meat, not even once a year, and urged him to give up the idea. Elle, however, decided to challenge Noel's confidence, saying, "You said you could get me any meat I want." Now, confident Noel pointed him in the right direction. Recently, some had been spotted in the lemon forest. Elle headed to the lemon forest, but the balenku was just too elusive. So, he decided to let Lorraine give it a try. In the next moment, a terrifying pressure covered the entire forest. With Lorraine's disappointment, the balenku was instantly paralyzed by the immense pressure and fainted. Lorraine smugly declared, "If you're not careful, you'll end up like this balenku." After a while, the two returned to the restaurant, where Lorraine happily had more beer. Elle reminded him not to finish it all, as the upcoming dishes and beer would pair perfectly. Later that evening, Ment's mercenary group had already gathered, eagerly waiting for Elle's cuisine. Elle had also brought his junior, Milding, along. "The seniors speak highly of this place," Milding said, eyes sparkling. "I really hope it lives up to your reputation." Then, a golden, crispy fried chicken was placed before them. "You must all know balenku," Elle said with a grin. "This is made from balenku meat." Milding was shocked. "The creature that even professional hunters can't catch is now food." Elle urged them to eat it while it's hot, as that's when it tastes best. It was their first time tasting balenku meat. After just one bite, they were hooked. Crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, every bite was an irresistible crunch. Milding couldn't help but eat to pieces at once. Elle knew this dish was a success, but with so many people, he couldn't handle it alone. He motioned for Lorraine to help, but Lorraine seemed reluctant. "You want me, a noble dragon, to serve humans?" Lorraine said, looking appalled. Elle was taken aback. He then shifted gears and used his Oscar-worthy acting skills. "If you don't like it, fine. After the war, we'll open a restaurant together and run it as partners. I think feelings can change over time, but for now, I'm fine alone. You can leave now." Lorraine was stunned. "I'll help. I'll work." Elle smiled at Lorraine's sudden change of heart. He took care of the cooking while Lorraine served food and beer. After a long while, they both collapsed at the table, exhausted. Finally done, Lorraine asked, happily munching on the fried chicken. Elle didn't expect Lorraine would even help clean up. "Did you finally grow up a bit?" Lorraine looked at him with a soft expression. This is our restaurant. Oh, suddenly, a strange aura crept into the room. Lorraine immediately sensed it and ducked behind Elle. The door creaked open, and Elle felt uneasy. No matter where I go, human cities are always unpleasant. Long time no see, Elder Metadana. Elle said, recognizing the visitor. Elle knew Metadana had come for Lorraine. It turned out that the dragon race had abandoned Lorraine and his mother long ago. Although Elle had taken him in, Metadana hadn't interfered. That had been the promise of the black dragons. But now the elder was acting dishonestly. Promises have order. They follow a sequence, Metadana said. In the Black Dragon clan, once you reach 800 years old, you are considered an adult. When Lorraine turns 800, he must go to the sacred land. That is the rule of the dragon race. No one can break it. Breaking it means war. Elle sighed. If that's the case, let's begin. Metadana transformed into his dragon human form and said, you may be stronger than the rumors say, but you underestimate me. Lorraine panicked and motioned for Elle not to start a war. Elle was puzzled. What war? I'm talking about building a dragon's lair, Elle said with a smile. Lorraine and Metadana both misunderstood. We have a whole year. Now we should have enough wealth to begin. Let's do it this way. Elder Metadana. Metadana nodded in agreement, and then left. Elle's next task, to build a dragon's lair, a magnificent interior filled with dazzling treasures. Clearly, creating a dragon's lair would require enormous time and resources. But now Elle was in a dilemma. The guests were pouring in, drawn by rumors of Barlanka meat. Even though Elle told them it wouldn't be sold anymore, he was still overwhelmed. I need a way to reduce the number of guests, Elle thought to himself. He turned to Noel. Looking at the mountains of Barlanko, Noel was dumbfounded. He still couldn't figure out why Elle needed so many. Elle explained, I'm going to provide Barlanka meat to you. The only place in the empire selling it will attract a lot of customers. What really piqued Noel's curiosity wasn't the Barlanko, but how Elle managed to capture them. Even the top hunters of Grek City would never have been able to do this. After discussing the terms, Noel agreed to the cooperation. At that moment, Noel noticed something strange. Why aren't they running? Elle had drawn a magic circle on the ground. A huge magical barrier instantly covered the entire mountain. Noel was stunned. This isn't something a person who's learned magic for just a few years can do. Is this guy a monster? Elle smiled. Just like you. I'm a retired war veteran and restaurant owner. Scene shift. A few days later, back at the restaurant, just as Elle expected, things were going even better than anticipated. Isn't this a bit too much? Elle thought. There were no customers today, but Lorraine was absolutely delighted. Now we have time to dig the cave. Before they could start, Elle led Lorraine to the base of the mountain where the restaurant was located. Since the restaurant was on the outskirts of the city, the nearby land was also his. Lorraine was very pleased with the location. But when it came to digging the cave, a magic barrier had to be set up, or the restaurant would collapse. Lorraine immediately rolled up his sleeves. But Elle turned to leave. The restaurant can't be left unattended, can it? Lorraine was taken aback. So, you're planning to slack off. Scene change. Elle returned to the restaurant. He hadn't had this much free time in a long while. Just then, the doorbell rang. A well-dressed boy entered, asking, is this the place where you can eat Balanku meat? Elle confirmed it. Yes, but I'm sorry. We no longer sell Balanku. You should try Noel's butcher shop. The boy seemed anxious and quickly asked, do you have anything else? Elle invited him to wait for a moment. He thought of a suitable dish. A burger should be just right for his taste. The patty was made from beef tenderloin, chopped and shaped, seasoned with a little salt, then fried in melted butter with bread. After placing the patty on some vegetables, Elle topped it off with a Balanku egg. Even the bun could bribe someone to eat it. When the boy saw the burger, he seemed interested. He picked it up and took a bite. But just then, the door opened again. A serious-looking butler called out the boy's name. Dylan looked scared and paused mid-bite. What if I eat food from this place and get poisoned? Elle was annoyed. Do you dare say my food is poisonous? The boy, Dylan, motioned for the two to stop arguing. He placed a coin on the table and walked out of the restaurant, clearly downhearted. Elle, seeing his forlorn expression, felt a bit concerned. Meanwhile, Lorraine, dirty and disheveled, ran back, complaining about all. Your turn now, Elle said. Lorraine was still hungry from working hard and suggested they go to the cave tomorrow. Elle, however, said he had more important things to do right now. He asked Lorraine to use spatial magic to teleport him there. After a bit of back-and forth, Lorraine, now hungry, agreed, and Elle promised him a meal when they returned. Scene shift. Dylan was back in his castle room. Just then, a portal opened, and Elle and Lorraine stepped through. "This is your stuff," Elle said. "Since you've already paid, here's your meal." Dylan immediately noticed the aroma of the burger and his mouth watered. But just as he was about to dig in, the door knocked. Elle, irritated, thought, "Can't anyone have a bit of private space?" Dylan, unsure what to do, turned to Elle for advice. Elle noticed his lack of confidence and assured him, "You're the heir to a barony. They can't refuse your commands." "But they never listen to me," Dylan replied. "The guards always ignore me." Lorraine sighed and then shouted, "No one can come in without my permission." Dylan was startled. Lorraine's voice had sounded exactly like his. The guards outside quickly left, and Elle told Dylan that he needed to assert his superiority. But then, to Elle's surprise, Dylan knelt down and asked, "Will you teach me?" He explained that he had never had a mother and had grown up with his stepmother, who never taught him how to lead. After his father became ill, his stepmother isolated him further and tried to limit his actions. Elle, seeing this, decided to teach him. "You say you want to be a good lord, but a lord's position comes with responsibility. You must be accountable for every word you say. Before making any decision, listen carefully and think it through. If it benefits you, great. If not, accept it and bear the responsibility." Elle signaled Dylan to eat his burger and leave. After Elle and Lorraine left, Dylan eagerly bit into the burger. The delicious taste instantly captivated him. With the help of the delicious food, Dylan had an epiphany. "I understand the real meaning now. I'll work hard from now on." Scene transition. Elle has appeared outside the restaurant, and the words he said earlier were just made up on the spot. He hopes Dylan won't take them seriously. Next, he's off to cook something delicious for Lorraine. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of Grek City, there's a popular clinic nestled in a forest. The doctor there is highly skilled and even practices magic-based healing. But that's not the main reason for her popularity. The real reason people flock to this clinic, far from the city center, is because it's run by a rare elf, not a human. However, she now seems troubled. She sighs and says that she's considering returning to her hometown. This leaves Rain confused. Elena explains, "Although I love healing and helping others, I've realized that no one is really interested in the healing part. People come just to see the elf, not me, the doctor. Even their families scold me. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm losing the motivation to keep going. Do you hate me too?" Elena immediately denies it. "It's because of you, Mrs. Rain, that I've been able to keep going." Rain understands that Elena's feeling loss, much like he once did. He recalls how Noel's snoring at night is deafening, but despite that, Noel is very reliable. "You used to enjoy healing people, didn't you?" Rain reassures Elena. Rain then recommends Elle's restaurant to her. This makes Elena curious. "I think you'd really like it." Scene transition. Elle is now digging a hole when, coincidentally, he bumps into Mr. Noel, who's there with his nephew for a meal. Noel mentions that a certain elf will be coming by. Elle hurries back to the restaurant. Elves are a rare race, so they shouldn't be treated casually, especially when they're in human towns. The elf, following Mrs. Rain's suggestion, arrives at the restaurant but finds only a little girl there. She asks if this is Elle's restaurant. Lorraine confirms, and from the elf's aura, Lorraine realizes she's an elf. Elves are indeed beautiful, but Lorraine feels a bit awkward. "You look very pretty, much younger than me," Lorraine says. The elf smiles. "You're calling me young." Lorraine smirks. "For our kind, I'm still young, but I should be older than you." Suddenly, a terrifying aura bursts from Lorraine, and she snarls, "How dare you speak to me like that?" Elena immediately drops to her knees, apologizing. "If you become my servant, I'll forgive your rudeness," Lorraine states. This scene is witnessed by Elle, who returns just in time. Elena, surprised, asks if Elle is human, to which Elle confirms. He also asks if Elena knows that the child is a black dragon. He asks her to keep this secret, as he's not ready to die. Elena, curious, asks if Elle is indeed human. Elle confirms again and apologizes for Lorraine's behavior. I didn't know this would happen when I wasn't around. Elena, still curious, asks if Rain recommended her. Elle confirms, and Elena admits, yes. I'm Elena. We really did mess up the first impression, didn't we? I hope we don't get bad reviews. She mentions that she came because she heard they serve delicious food, even if it's made with only vegetables. Elle quickly understands that elves don't eat meat, as they cannot digest it, and decides to make something suitable for Elena. He prepares a tomato pasta with chopped onions, garlic, and mushrooms, sautéed in olive oil to blend the flavors. The tomatoes are strained, added to the pan with salt, sugar, and other spices, and cooked at a low heat to avoid burning. The pasta is boiled for 8 minutes, then mixed with the tomato sauce, adjusting its thickness with some reserved pasta water. Elle offers Elena the dish, assuring her that it contains no meat. The pasta looks inviting, with a vibrant color and a fragrant aroma. Meanwhile, Noel's meat is ready, but Elle notices that his nephew seems lost in thought. So, he was about to ask Elena if the food was okay. He looked back, only to see her wolfing it down, barely noticing him. I never knew food could taste so good, said Elena. Finished the food on her plate in a few bites. She didn't even care that she made a mess of her food, splattering her face with ketchup. Elena becomes embarrassed and Elle hands her a napkin, reassuring her not to be nervous. Elle notices that Elena doesn't often eat out. Elena confirms, saying she thought vegetables weren't much different, but didn't expect the food here to be so delicious. I think I'll be a regular from now on. With a satisfied customer, Elle feels relieved. Just as things were going smoothly, a quarrel broke out nearby. It turned out that Alan had found out he was adopted, and to his shock, he'd been deceived for over 20 years. This revelation threw him off balance, and he couldn't focus on his work. In frustration, he left the mine early. The two people nearby awkwardly looked at each other, unsure if they had been eavesdropping. Noel then asked him, "Don't you know how Mrs. Emiya raised you? She worked tirelessly, day and night, just so you'd have enough to eat. Even though your father passed away when he was a mercenary, you still don't think he did a lot for you, despite not being your biological father." Alan admitted he knew all that, but now he was too afraid to go home. He had fought with his mother earlier that afternoon. Hearing this, Noel grew upset, as the two got into an argument. Al stepped in to stop them. Just then, the door flew open again. It was Mrs. Rain, looking flustered. "Alan, you need to get to the mine right now. There's been a collapse, and your mother's trapped inside." Without another word, Alan turned and sprinted toward the mine. Elena, wanting to help, also offered to go with them since she could assist with medical treatment. Al quickly donned her mage robes, and they made their way to the mine. When they reached the entrance, Alan was stopped by guards, concerned that there might be a secondary collapse. Al intervened, telling the guards to calm down and that they would take over. After some persuasion, the guards agreed. Inside the mine, things quickly took a dangerous turn when rocks suddenly fell from above, but Elle used her magic shield to stop them. Elena was surprised Elle was a mage. This made her even more curious. But Elle was more interested in why Elena had risked her life to come here. Soon, they arrived at a fork in the path. They didn't have enough time to search every route, so Elle decided to use magic to sense the survivors. Following the guidance of her magic, Elle quickly found the injured. After Elena examined them, she found one person with serious leg injuries. With the help of her healing magic, the wounds healed quickly, and they continued to help more people. While Elena treated the injured, Elle used magic to clear the rubble and move the survivors to safety. Eventually, they reached the end of the mine, where they found Alan's mother, Emiya. After Elena's examination, she found Emiya had suffered a serious head injury. Elena needed to use more advanced healing magic but couldn't guarantee the outcome. Soon, everyone was safely out of the mine. With Elena's efforts, Mrs. Emiya was no longer in danger. Her injuries weren't severe, and after a simple bandage, she would be fine. Seeing his mother injured, Alan felt deeply guilty. If it wasn't for me, this wouldn't have happened. Just then, Mrs. Emiya woke up. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. The first thing she said was, "Alan, are you hurt?" This broke Alan's composure, and he could no longer hold back his emotions. Mrs. Emiya didn't seem to hold him responsible, though. Meanwhile, Elena explained why she had gone into the mine. "I was planning to close my clinic and go back to my homeland. Though the lifespan of humans is much shorter than that of elves, they can express their emotions freely. I realize there are so many things here I cherish, and I can't just leave. I love the sincerity of human emotions, and now I know how delicious the food here is." As Elena spoke, exhaustion caught up with her, and she nearly collapsed. Al quickly caught her, offering support. Elena apologized, but El simply cast an elven recovery spell, and Elena immediately felt much lighter. Suddenly, Elena was called by a voice. It was a fellow elf named Baden, and Elena was shocked. Baden was a great hero in their elven community. This made her even more curious about Ul's true identity. Elsewhere, Lorien, who had been punished, was still grumbling while digging. Then, unexpectedly, a stream of water splashed on his face. "Did I just dig out a spring?" To confirm his findings, Lorien dug deeper. But El grew concerned. It was a dangerous move. Even though Lorien dug deep, the source of the water was undetectable by El's magic. El knew that the cave space had expanded, so it needed support to prevent a collapse. She began chanting a spell, and soon an 8th-level magic shield was created. Lorien, however, warned her to be careful. If you mess up with an 8th-level spell, you could blow the entire mountain apart. El just nodded. With a wave of her magic, the entire cave lit up. Moments later, a massive shield held the mountain in place, while the previously lost underground water began to surge. El realized that the water was hot. It was a spring. The spell she had cast likely stirred it up. Lorien, eager to wash off the dirt, rushed toward it without waiting for El's warning, only to quickly burn his face from the heat. El used magic to separate the water, allowing the dirt to settle, and soon enough, clean hot water filled the shielded area, forming an improvised hot spring. El then picked up Lorien and tossed him into the spring. Lorien, caught off guard, initially thought he was about to be cooked for a black dragon hot pot. El reassured him, saying, "You'll be fine. Just wait a bit." El then joined Lorien in the spring. During their soak, Lorien asked where El had been during the day. After learning she had gone to rescue people with the elves, Lorien was furious. El explained, "The injured needed a doctor. I'm not skilled in healing magic." Lorien, still angry, admitted, "I hate all races, even elves. I look down on everyone." This was when El decided to teach Lorien a lesson in humility. She prepared a cup of coffee and handed it to Lorien. "Try this." Lorien, curious, asked, "What's this dark stuff?" El explained, "It's cocoa powder made from cocoa beans. It might look simple, but it takes a lot of work to make. People go through planting, fermentation, roasting, and pressing to get it. We can only enjoy it because of all the hard work behind it." Lorien took a sip, surprised by the bittersweet flavor. "I didn't know something could taste both bitter and sweet." El smiled, "Just like the collapsed mine. I can destroy mountains, but I can't heal a single injured person. Without Noel, I wouldn't even have the ingredients for this food. Even though I can create large spaces with magic, I still need the dwarves to build proper facilities." El continued, "There are differences in abilities and personalities between races, but that doesn't mean we should reject everyone because of it. Even dragons can't conquer the world alone." Lorien, reflecting on El's words, finally understood. "I'll treat you and others differently from now on." On the other side, Ment's mercenary group was locked in a fierce battle with a group of thieves. During the fight, both sides found themselves at the edge of a cliff. At that moment, Ment noticed that Milding was in danger. Fortunately, he killed the thief just in time. But then, the thief leader seized the opportunity and launched a sneak attack from behind. Luckily, Ment reacted quickly, dodging the attack. He then punched the leader, sending him flying. However, the leader chose to go down with him, grabbing Ment as they both fell off the cliff. Cut to the scene back at the restaurant. El had decided not to open the restaurant today. He was planning to add a little milk to the coffee, so he needed to build a farm to ensure a stable supply. Once the farm was built, they would go catch some milk-producing animals. El had also learned the exact location of Yucca, which was upstream of the Wylient River. He signaled Lorien to use teleportation magic to take him there. Lorien hesitated because her teleportation magic only worked to places she had visited. The last time they went to the Earl's mansion, she had tracked Dylan's scent. El reassured her, saying, "Don't worry. I'll guide you with the direction and distance. Just follow your instincts." Reluctantly, Lorien cast the magic. though she wasn't sure if the location was correct. Cut to the next scene, the two of them quickly arrived over a lake, with Yuka's habitat directly below them. Elle was relieved they had come to the right place, and Loreen confirmed this as well. But then, Elle remembered that Loreen was a black dragon. Why would a dragon be afraid of the sky? He told her. Just spread your wings. But Loreen refused to transform into her dragon form. Elle, puzzled, decided to use levitation magic instead. He wasn't sure why Loreen disliked her dragon form so much. There seemed to be a deep secret inside her. However, Elle didn't press the issue. Soon, the two of them safely landed on the ground. Loreen remarked that it was her first time seeing such a large lake. Elle explained that it was actually the ocean, and it was normal for her to have never seen it since she had spent most of her time in caves. Elle promised that after catching Yuka, they would go to the ocean for some fun. Hearing this, Loreen became excited and asked how many animals they needed to catch. She immediately suggested a competition, with the loser having to do the dishes. Meanwhile, at the restaurant's entrance, 3 people were waiting. They had been waiting since noon but still hadn't seen Elle return. Though each of them had different tastes, they all had a dish they were eagerly anticipating. They were determined to taste the food Elle had made. At the same time, a portal opened at the farm's location, and out walked Loreen and Elle, both soaked, followed by a herd of tame Yuka. This was all thanks to Loreen's black dragon blood, which could suppress many animals. Next, Elle planned to build a sleeping area for the Yuka, and then the farm would be complete. When Elle returned to the restaurant, he was taken aback. He found the 3 people nearly starving outside the door. Elle hadn't expected them to wait for him for so long. After a moment, Noel eagerly dug into some roast pork, and the group finally felt satisfied. If they hadn't eaten, there would likely have been 3 graves next to the restaurant. Loreen, the employee, was once again stuck washing the dishes. At this point, Noel asked about Elle's farm building plans. Such a large farm must require some help, right? He asked. Elle confirmed Noel's guess, explaining that someone would need to monitor the grass and feed the animals. He planned to hold interviews for this position. Noel, intrigued, assured Elle that he didn't need to worry. Leave it to us, he said. Alana could read people's intentions well, and Dylan had learned how to find trustworthy individuals. In return, she said, "You have to cook us something delicious." The next day, Elle prepared a job posting for the farm, and within half a day, the restaurant was filled with people applying for the job. The first interview began, and the first applicant, a young man, was immediately rejected by Noel for his lack of energy. The second applicant, a handsome young man, impressed Noel. However, Noel noticed Selena nearby, and suddenly, all kinds of bad thoughts crossed his mind. Alana immediately declared the applicant a failure. When Noel heard her reasoning, he became angry. An older man with 30 years of experience in managing pastures came in. He promised to make the farm the best pasture in town. Dylan then put him to the test, asking, "What are your plans for the development of yucca and incentives for producing and selling dairy products? How will you handle diseases and injuries?" The man was left speechless. Before the 3 could announce their decision, the man stormed off, muttering, "A farm with so many requirements, you must be crazy." Loreen was surprised by how difficult it was to find a worker, and soon enough, the next interview failed as well. The applicant was someone who had tried to start a fight in the butcher shop earlier. With a strange look, he failed the interview. After interviewing several people, Elle began to doubt life itself. Was it because the wages in the ad were too low? Just as Elle was losing hope, the door opened again. It was Milding, which confused Noel. He had heard that Man was sent to protect a merchant caravan. Milding then explained what had happened. The mercenary group had been ambushed by bandits while protecting the caravan, and during the battle, Man accidentally fell off a cliff. Noel became very concerned. "How is he now?" Milding reassured him, saying that while Man's external injuries had healed, he had suffered severe leg injuries and had retired from mercenary work. Elle suggested they have Elena check him out, as she might be able to help him recover. Just then, Loreen asked seriously, "Why do you want to work here?" Dale immediately signaled Loreen, saying, "You can't ask that in this situation." Loreen pouted, "I was just curious." Milding hesitated for a moment and then said, "I want to find something I can do in the future because I hope to work with him someday." Everyone froze in place. Noel, in disbelief, asked, "Wait, are you saying you're in love with him? How old are you this year?" When they learned that Milding was 29, and the age gap between them was 12 years, Milding said, "I don't mind at all." Elena nodded. That's actually pretty normal among the elves, but for humans, the age difference is a bit much. However, Milding was resolute. "I'm no longer a mercenary. If I can't work here, I'll starve on the street." Lorraine was satisfied with his determination. "I accept that you'll work here." Milding thanked her sincerely. Elle then asked, "Does Mint know about this?" Milding replied, "I plan to ask him to work with me when I get the first cup of milk from the farm. He taught me everything before. Now I want to do it just like he did." Elena admired his determination, and Elle had already decided what the next meal would be. The next day, Milding arrived early at the farm, asking Lauren what to do next. Elle told her to let the yucca out of the pasture to graze. Milding was surprised that the usually ferocious yucca had become so gentle. She must have used some powerful magic. But just as she turned, one of the yucca rammed her, sending her flying. She used all her strength to push them, but they didn't budge, and she was kicked away instead. Elle could only pray for her. "Milding, hang in there." The hard work on the farm continued. If they were wild animals, their hooves would naturally be worn down during movement, but if you're raising them, you have to maintain their hooves regularly. A few days later, Milding was sprawled on the ground, exhausted, realizing she didn't even know how to herd them, let alone milk them. At this rate, she'd be fired before even getting to work with him. Just then, all the yucca gathered around her. Milding spotted a nearby bucket. "Maybe I can give this a try." A short while later, Milding returned to the restaurant beaming, with her first successful labor result. Even Elle didn't expect her to get the first one so quickly. Elle nodded approvingly. "Good job. Now, time to prepare the meal." First, she had to pasteurize the milk at a low temperature for 30 minutes. Don't let it boil. Then, slightly lower the temperature and add vinegar to make the milk curdle. If we had rennet, that would be even better, but we'll make do with vinegar here. Once the curds have set, cut them up and separate them from the whey. Stretch and fold the curd in brine and hot water, removing any remaining air bubbles, excess whey, and water. Then mold them into shape. This was Milding's first time seeing such a process. Afterward, Elle asked, "What gift do you plan to give to Mint?" Milding immediately blushed, even though she hadn't prepared anything, but she saw it as an opportunity to confess. Elle, ever the boastful one, added, "When I walked through doors back in the day, women would line up. Have you ever been in love?" Elle froze. "Actually, no." But he quickly recovered. "Don't worry. As long as you're sincere, Mint will feel it." The scene shifts. The door to Mint's room is knocked. He didn't expect everyone to find this place. He can only awkwardly apologize, saying, "I didn't mean to hide this from everyone." This makes Mr. Noel very angry. "You should have told us sooner." Then, Elle introduces him to Elena. "She will be of great help to you." At this moment, Mint is also very curious. "How did you find out?" Only the mercenary group would know this location. Soon, he guesses it was Milding. Meanwhile, Elena uses elven magic to heal Mint's leg. Soon, he's able to stand up. Elena says it might be difficult for him to fully recover, but this will aid in the healing process. Mint notices that Milding is acting unusually today. "Do you have something you want to say to everyone?" Milding didn't expect it to be harder to speak than he thought. Everyone is nervously watching, and to break the awkward silence, Milding changes the subject to food. "Maybe if you see the food, you'll understand what I mean." Then, a heart-shaped pizza is placed in front of everyone. It's Mint's first time seeing such a dish. Milding explains, "This is called pizza, and I made it for you. I'll helped a lot. It looks great, right?" But unexpectedly, Mint just picks up a slice and ruins the heart shape. Al quickly adds, "It's made with cheese." Mint tries a bite of the sweet pizza, which has a faint cheese flavor and a rich texture. He gives his approval to the food. At this moment, Milding can only eat with tears in his eyes. It seems that using food to express his feelings has failed. Soon, the pizza is finished. Milding asks, "What are your plans for the future?" Mint says he hasn't decided yet. Then, Milding asks him, "Would you want to work with me on Elle's farm?" Mint is stunned. "You're already working there. What about your mercenary job?" Milding explains, "I've quit because I want to prepare for our future." Everyone acknowledges Milding's courage, but Mint vaguely senses something's wrong. He sighs, "Looks like I need to work hard to recover. Since you're not a mercenary anymore, can't you find a boyfriend?" This shocks everyone into silence. "At your age, you should be looking for someone." Mr. Knoll can't hold back anymore. Mint looks at him in confusion, wondering if he really doesn't see it. The scene shifts. After dinner, Milding leaves. Everyone is concerned about her. Milding reassures them, "I'm fine now," and bids them farewell. But as he turns around, tears are already streaming down his face. Mr. Knoll is puzzled. Why doesn't he understand? Alna gestures to the two of them, saying, "I understand Milding's feelings. You can tell from his eyes." Meanwhile, Mint sits alone in the living room, unsure of what to do. The scene shifts again. At this moment, Dylan anxiously asks the butler about his father's condition. The butler informs him that the Count's health isn't good. As the heir, Dylan must face this responsibility himself. As the door slowly opens, Dylan gathers his courage and walks in. Seeing him, the prince smiles and greets him. Dylan, in turn, gives the prince the highest respect. Then, the prince learns that because the Count is bedridden, he cannot come to greet him, and expresses his regret. However, Hilgo doesn't seem happy. If that's the case, it means it's time to replace the city lord, he says, trying to pull Dylan into his faction. Dylan's heart skips a beat. He doesn't have an answer to these questions yet. Then, Hilgo changes the subject. Because of the large-scale flood control plan and the Border Kingdom's civil war, we're planning to raise taxes in Dreek City. Of course, things might have been different if you'd accepted my earlier proposal. Is this question that hard to answer? Facing the Earl's relentless questioning, Dylan raised his voice and said, "I've prepared a dinner, I'll give you my answer then." The prince immediately became interested. "You think you can impress someone who has dined in the palace?" Dylan confidently replied, "Of course, there's a great restaurant in Drake." Meanwhile, it's lunchtime. Milding put down the cow feed and turned her attention to the egg-fried rice in front of her. Lorraine was already impatient, but she didn't pick up the spoon because she felt like her portion was smaller than the others. Just then, the restaurant door was kicked open, and a group of soldiers appeared before them. Al was confused, as he didn't recognize any of them. At the same time, the soldiers slowly drew their swords. "Are you the owner of this restaurant?" Al confirmed, "Yes, but please put away your sword." Lorraine, who had been happily eating, looked up and asked El if he needed help. Before El could respond, a sword was pressed against his neck, and they ordered him to kneel or he wouldn't see the light of tomorrow. El, visibly angry, retorted, "This is my final warning, get out of my restaurant." Just as the soldiers were about to act, a voice commanded them to stop. "Who told you to do that?" The soldiers immediately froze. When the man took off his helmet, it turned out to be an old comrade, Durianti. He then punished all the soldiers who had just acted. As they chatted, Durianti reminisced about the past. His carelessness had almost led to the destruction of the entire army, but El had stepped in to save the day. And even though El had refused the Empire's reward, he had given all the prize money to Durianti's wife. Durianti was deeply moved because, in his pursuit of personal honor, he had neglected his family. But El's actions touched him greatly. When he learned that El had opened a restaurant here, he immediately came to see him. And now, he had a plan to make El's restaurant the best in Drake. El was stunned by the news. Suddenly, Durianti charged forward with his sword, signaling the soldiers to follow him. El had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, the prince was on his way to the restaurant. Hilgo suggested that the prince should be escorted by a guard. Before he finished speaking, several hidden weapons flew toward the prince, but they were blocked by a magical shield. It was their chief mage, Medellin. Immediately, a group of assassins appeared before the party. The Earl ordered Medellin to leave no one alive. At this moment, Medellin slowly took off her hat, making the assassins feel uneasy. However, their leader signaled them to proceed with the plan. The next second, they charged at Medellin. Without hesitation, she raised her hand and cast a high-level spell. The ground in front of them was instantly overturned. The prince sighed. "Medellin is the Empire's most powerful 7th-tier mage. With her here, I'm not even afraid of dragons." Medellin humbly replied, "You're overestimating me." Dylan, witnessing the scene, was in awe. It seemed the legends were true, the only person capable of taking on an entire army by herself, a 7th-tier mage. Meanwhile, Elle was using magic to restrain Duryanti. It turned out he had a bad habit. Whenever he got excited, he would run off without a word. Elle then asked him about the methods he used in other restaurants. Duryanti confessed that he had visited all the nearby restaurants and told them their food had bugs. This left Elle stunned. That's quite creative, but it's not what I wanted you to do. Duryanti apologized profusely. Meanwhile, the sound of galloping hooves echoed. The soldiers immediately became serious. Seeing this, Duryanti also bowed respectfully. The prince was surprised to see Duryanti here as well. He quickly explained, I heard there's a good restaurant here, so I decided to try it out. The prince waved it off. No need to be so formal, I didn't come alone. He then greeted Elle. Are you the owner of this restaurant? Elle nodded, yes, welcome. Elle was curious. Why would a prince come to Drake City? The prince noticed Elle's mage robe, an old one from his army days. Elle explained, I served in the Mage Legion for a while, but I've retired for years now. The prince looked shocked. If that's the case, then you must know her, my personal mage guard. She was also part of the Legion. He gestured for Medellin to check his back. Hilgo was not pleased, thinking it was a waste of time to visit this small restaurant. But Medellin looked terrified. Her breathing quickened, as if she saw something terrifying. At Hilgo's reminder, she snapped back to reality, dismounting in a hurry. Medellin, do you know this mage? Medellin hesitated, unable to answer directly. She had to be careful. If she angered him, everyone here would be in danger. Elle gave her a friendly smile. I don't think we've met. Medellin quickly nodded. Yes, we haven't. It's nice to meet you, Mr. L. Medellin explained. This restaurant is hosting a banquet for His Highness for a chef. It's a great honor. Elle nodded. Scene change. The prince's party entered the restaurant, and he immediately complimented the cleanliness. Elle smiled and apologized. We don't have the splendor of the royal palace here. Then Elle asked, forgive my curiosity, but how did you find this place? I heard the food here is so good, it might even surprise the royal family. Elle looked at Dylan, who was beginning to understand. Looks like my peaceful life is about to be interrupted, he thought. His father's health issues had led him into a power struggle, and now he had come to all for help. Elle noticed Hilgo. He was among the top 3 in the palace when it came to thirst for power. Elle's gaze turned sharp as he looked at the prince. I can't just let this slide. At that moment, the prince proposed a bet. If the food here doesn't leave me stunned, Dylan will have to run around Drake City naked. Dylan froze in shock. Elle reassured him. Won't worry, the next dish will definitely surprise you. So, you accept the bet. Is it possible to surprise someone like me, who's tasted every dish in the empire? Elle had a plan. The first appetizer, lamb stew with mushrooms, was ready. The prince was curious and eager to try it. Impressing someone like him with a single dish wasn't easy. After tasting it, the prince gave it high marks but didn't seem particularly surprised. As he'd had this dish in the palace before, Hilgo agreed with the prince's assessment. Elle, however, wasn't flustered. Let's see what the others think. Medellin, trembling, opened the mushroom soup. To her horror, the mushrooms displayed a line of text to please give me an enthusiastic response. Medellin shuddered, thinking, isn't this a world-class challenge? But she steeled herself and put on her acting skills. This soup is amazing. I've never had such delicious mushroom soup. It feels like there are mushrooms growing in my stomach. The others exchanged awkward glances. What's going on here? The acting's there, but not much else. Medellin's exaggerated performance left the prince confused. Is it really that good? He decided to take another bite. Dylan, on the other hand, was skeptical. He knew Medellin had to have tasted this mushroom soup before. A 7th-tier mage wouldn't be fooled so easily. Dylan turned his gaze toward the back. Meanwhile, Elle couldn't help but laugh quietly to himself. The prince tried the soup again but didn't find anything different. It tastes just like the one in the palace, he said. Hilgo added, I never imagined you'd enjoy lamb and mushroom soup this much. When we return to the palace, I'll make sure it's added to your meals. Medellin froze, her face paling. She quickly gestured to Hilgo. I just really like the soup here. After finishing, another line of text appeared. Elle asked her to finish the soup and go outside the restaurant. Medellin panicked. What if I don't finish it? I'll be in big trouble. The prince asked Hilgo curiously. Does Medellin always act like this when she eats? Hilgo sighed, shaking his head. Scene shift. Medellin steps outside. And Elle has been waiting for her. Medellin cautiously approaches. Suddenly, a powerful magic envelops her body. It's a soundproof spell. Elle greets her with a friendly smile. It's been a while. Medellin, you did well back there. But you shouldn't be here. I recall warning you about us not meeting again. Medellin quickly explains. I swear, I had no idea you lived here. Elle raises an eyebrow. Why is the prince here? Medellin hesitates. Clearly uncomfortable. He's the most notorious prince I've heard. He's a ladies' man with no interest in power. I thought the same until today. Elle leans in. He's pretending to be a harmless fool, using his bad image as a shield to pressure the Duke of Drake. Medellin looks shocked. You figured it out. Elle smiles. You don't have to tell me. I understand, but what you're doing, it's not going unnoticed. Medellin tries to backtrack. I can't tell you too much. I'm his personal mage, after all. Before Elle can respond, a voice interrupts. Oh, even under torture, you won't speak. Elle turns and sees Lauren. Medellin's legs nearly give out in that moment. All she wants is to go home. A little while later, Medellin's face is ashen. She is trembling, visibly shaken. The prince is more concerned about the bet with Dylan. If the food here doesn't amaze me, you're losing the bet. Got it. Dylan stays silent, feeling the pressure. The prince eyes him seriously. You know what this means, right? Even if your father himself made the food, it wouldn't surprise me unless you managed to wow me. Under that pressure, Dylan stands firm. The position of count comes with responsibility. I have the right to let the people make their own choices. I'll endure my shame, but I trust this restaurant. If I lose, I'll run naked around Drake City. Cut to evening. The final dish is ready. The prince nods at Elle. This dish is crucial. You look confident. Elle smiles. Of course. He lifts the lid, revealing a dark, muddy clump. Hilgo looks confused. Are we really eating this? Elle picks up a hammer and taps the clump. Leaves appear, and a delicious, aromatic barranku emerges. The prince is intrigued. How did you do that? Elle explains. At first glance, it looks like a lump of nothing. If a stranger saw it, they'd wonder what it was, but that's the point. It's meant to surprise. You'll never guess what's inside. The prince listens carefully. What are you implying? Elle shrugs. Just a regular dish, with a deeper meaning, a bit like how your highness plays the role of the harmless fool while secretly plotting to strengthen your claim. Hilgo's utensils fall from his hand. Medellin keeps her head down, too scared to speak. Elle smirks. I shouldn't have let the secret slip. But you're good at playing the innocent prince, aren't you? Acting like you're not interested in power while secretly scheming to take back your throne. Hilgo is taken aback. Do you know what you're saying? Elle ignores him, focusing on the prince. Your actions are nothing but a show. You're gathering troops in secret, preparing to strike against the nobles. If this leaks, what happens then? You lose your title. Hilgo interrupts, ordering Durianti to control Elle. I'll make sure this restaurant vanishes. Durianti isn't sure, clearly confused. Elle stands unshaken. You think you can get rid of me that easily? When Durianti doesn't move, Elle calls on Medellin to bind him. Medellin hesitates, terrified. My lord, I can't do that. Hilgo is even more frustrated, ordering his soldiers to act immediately. But the prince seems to sense something is wrong. He starts gobbling up the barranku, completely abandoning his royal demeanor. Everyone stares, confused. What just happened? The prince is thoroughly enjoying the dish. You guys should try it, too. Hilgo refuses to sit down. The prince slams his fist on the table. Sit down, now. It's the first time Hilgo has seen the prince this furious, but he reluctantly joins in. After tasting the food, the prince asks, didn't you find this surprising? Hilgo understands the implication and gives a reluctant nod. Of course, if I said I wasn't amazed by such a delicious dish, I'd be lying. You win the bet. Dylan grins, happy to have one. The prince thanks Elle again, preparing to leave. I had planned to stay another day, but I've already heard the Baron of Drake's answer. It's time to head back to the palace. Dylan, still puzzled, asks, I won the bet, but I don't get it. What's really going on here? Elle smiles. You'll understand in time. As long as I'm here, they won't dare move. And with that, they prepare to eat their meal and not waste any more time. On the other side, at this moment, the prince and his party were quietly making their way back. Durianti had no idea what was going on, but something felt off. The prince suddenly asked Medellin, is that the chef you mentioned? Medellin nodded. He's a terrifying presence. The prince had suspected as much. A person whom even nobles and knights must show respect to. This made Hilgo shudder. Even Medellin and Durianti would be in danger here. The prince agreed with that view. He's an unpredictable variable, so should I gamble? Hilgo didn't think it was a good idea to risk life and honor on one person, but the prince had already made up his mind. This journey is far more dangerous than walking naked through the streets. A few days later, L's warehouse for the Yuka was finally ready. Just then, Yuka walked over and gave it a gentle kick. The rain poured down, and the warehouse instantly turned into a pile of rubble. L was stunned. The house he had worked so hard to build, destroyed so easily. It must be because I don't have any building knowledge. Meanwhile, Lorraine asked, wasn't the restaurant built by you? L confirmed, it was built by the architect. Looks like we're heading somewhere now, Lorraine said, confused. Where's a place where a builder would live? Later, at the foot of the Miliarek Mountains. At this point, Selena, the red dragon, noticed someone near her lair. Looks like I've been too long without going out. You'll soon realize whose carpet you're stepping on. Elle and Lorraine had embarked on a journey to find a dwarven craftsman due to the warehouse construction. Lorraine, curious, asked, can't we find a human craftsman? Elle shook his head. We need to build a solid warehouse. And no one compares to dwarves when it comes to construction. Soon, they arrived at a cave entrance, but what Elle found was shocking. It was in ruins, completely different from when they had last visited. Why is it in such a decayed state? And there were no guards at the entrance. Just then, Elle froze. The ground was covered in the remains of soldiers. Someone had beaten them here. Who the hell was it? Inside the cave, Selena noticed someone approaching her territory. I'll make you aware of whose land you're stepping on. She was thrilled to have visitors because she had been bored for too long. Just as she stood up to go greet them, she accidentally stepped on a crown lying on the ground. The pain spread through her body. Damn thing. Then, she quickly appeared at the cave entrance. I expected a mighty race, but it's just a kid. Isn't that disappointing? Selena mocked Elle as she was still furious. A mere human dares to step into my domain. I'll ask her if she was the one who had destroyed the dwarven work. At first, Selena was stunned by the question. You should at least respect the great dragon race. Without warning, she breathed a blast of dragon fire at Elle. Lorraine quickly signaled Elle to dodge, but Elle wasn't about to move. His eyes were cold, filled with sharp killing intent. He activated a regular 9th tier magic. In an instant, all the dragon flames were absorbed by a barrier. This stunned Selena. What's going on? Immediately after, Elle raised his hand and launched a magical attack. The massive red dragon was pushed back several steps, and her tough scales were pierced. Is this really a human? It didn't take long for her to realize who he was. The man who had single-handedly killed all the red dragons. But why are you with a black dragon? Elle sighed. Answer my question first. Seeing Elle about to cast another spell, Selena quickly begged. It wasn't me. It was already like this when I arrived. Before Selena came, the place had already been in ruins. Because of that, she hadn't received any tribute. Seeing that Elle didn't believe her, she pointed out that there was a large door inside the cave. Elle's interest was piqued. If you want to know how to get there, I can personally take you, she said, flipping her hair. Wouldn't it be more fun to be with me than with that kid? Before Elle could respond, Lorraine delivered a swift kick. Elle is mine. Selena's thigh was hurt again, and she fell to her knees. Where is it? Selena shakily pointed forward. At this moment, Lorraine felt incredibly pleased. After a while, the two of them quickly arrived at the dwarven town, but it had already turned into a wasteland. Lorraine looked at the battle scars on the buildings clearly. They were left by dragons. Elle agreed with her assessment but added, we can't be sure it was them just yet. At that moment, a massive iron door appeared in front of them. Covered in dragon bite marks, it looked extremely sturdy. Just as Elle was about to break it down, a voice suddenly came from behind the door. Please, leave your trespassing. Elle immediately asked, what happened here? The dwarf paused for a moment, then said angrily, a red dragon destroyed everything. Lorraine's face turned red with rage. I knew it was him. She spat. Elle grabbed her arm before she could do anything. Hold on. Let him explain. Are you sure it was Selena? Elle wondered aloud. Judging by the marks on the door, it seemed like several red dragons had attacked at once. Elle's mind was already working on a plan. Lorraine, confused, asked, a peaceful solution. Elle smiled. Something like that then, from the dwarf. They learned the door had been shut for a year. Al wasn't surprised. A lot had likely happened in the past year. What concerned him most was the dwarf's food situation. Without supplies, resources would run out quickly. Are you sure you won't open the door for us? Al asked. I'm trying to help. The dwarf, however, seemed very suspicious and willing to trust strangers. Are you with the red dragons? He demanded. This set Lorien off. She immediately started shouting angrily. Seeing this, Al gently pinched her cheek. They have a point, he said, calming her down. Let's try a different approach. Al then motioned for Lorien to grab the backpack. As she did, he pulled out a frying pan. The journey back is long, Al said casually. We'll need to eat. The dwarves stared at him, confused. Right here, at the door. But Al didn't seem to mind. He sat up right in front of the door and began cooking. Lorien pulled out a series of sausages. The dwarves, still watching, asked, what are those? Al grinned and explained. These are sausages, ground meat, and spices stuffed into casings, perfect for travel. Just a quick cook, and they're good to go. They smell incredible, especially in a small space like this. As the scent filled the air, the dwarves began to stir. Lorien knew this was El's plan. El smiled at the dwarves. These sausages were meant to be a gift, but considering the situation, I just want to know what happened here. Is that too much to ask? The dwarves hesitated, still unsure. El gave a little shrug and started packing up the sausages. Such a shame, he said. I salted them to make them last longer. They go perfectly with a cold beer. Then he pulled out a can of beer, popping it open with a grin. I'm sure you'll enjoy this. I bet the sausages will taste even better with it. By now, the dwarves could hardly hold back. The smell of the sausages had them drooling. Meanwhile, the giant door, which had been closed for a year, slowly creaked open. Al smiled slightly. I'm terribly sorry. I was left with no choice but to resort to this. Looking at the sausages sizzling in the pan, the dwarves couldn't help but drool. From their reaction, Al knew they were seriously running low on food. Al chuckled. You're all starving, aren't you? But be careful not to burn yourselves. After just one taste, the dwarf felt as if he had been brought back to life. Who knew we could still eat food like this? Although it's not ideal to drink alcohol on an empty stomach, dwarves have a high tolerance for alcohol. The alcohol's strength had no effect on them. Then, Al noticed a dwarf nearby. Do you know Gulcher? The dwarf was instantly shocked. How do you know that name? It turned out that El and Gulcher were friends, and these sausages were a gift for him. A moment later, Al entered the dwarf's cave. After a quick scan, he found that about 20 to 30 households of dwarves lived there. What happened to them? Al soon reached the end of the cave. After a soldier's report, a faint voice came from behind the curtain. Long time no see, Gulcher. It was the current leader of the dwarves. At the same time, Gulcher also noticed Lorien behind El, recognizing her presence immediately from her aura. Seeing the leader speak so respectfully, the soldiers were curious about the two's identities. Al directly stated his purpose. Tell me, what happened here? Why has this peaceful dwarf village turned into a wasteland? Gulcher hesitated for a moment, then shared what had happened. A red dragon had attacked them. Faced with overwhelming power, only a few dwarves had survived. Al then asked about the red dragon's characteristics. Was it a red dragon with red hair and horns that grow backward? Gulcher covered his forehead, visibly agitated. Not just one. We were attacked by a group of red dragons. This made Al think of the bite marks on the door. It seemed true, but that didn't make sense. How could the proud red dragons cooperate, unless something had caused them to lose control? Al then speculated that there must be something special here. This made the soldiers' hearts race. Gulcher stroked his beard and pressed a button under the table. Moments later, a hidden door appeared. Gulcher began recounting the dwarves' history. In fact, they had been attacked by red dragons many times. The reason they hadn't been wiped out was because of an ancient dragon skeleton they had hidden. El was struck with awe when he saw the skeleton. Based on its size, it was clear this dragon was over 5,000 years old. It was one of the oldest dragons, Q-Red. When the essence of this dragon was entrusted to the dwarves, it left. The reason it hid this essence in such a tough cave was because this essence could create a new dragon king, one who could command all other dragons. If these mighty dragons united under one commander, no kingdom or powerful warrior would be able to stop them. Lorien, however, felt an uncanny familiarity with this essence. She had seen something similar when she was young, at her mother's place. But her mother was eventually imprisoned by the elders of the dragons. At that time, she had no idea what it meant. It wasn't until she witnessed the most heartbreaking scene of her life that she understood. Whenever Lorraine remembered these events, tears would fill her eyes. Seeing this, Elle stepped forward to comfort her. He promised that he would never let anyone harm Lorraine. Gulcher felt deeply apologetic. I'm sorry for bringing back those painful memories, but these essences are often surrounded by sorrow and pain. Curad once tried to destroy it, but he never succeeded. Just then, Elle gestured to Gulcher. He planned to build a stronghold in Drake City and invited the dwarves to come along. There, they would create a new dwarven village. As for the essence that could give birth to a dragon king, I have no interest in it. Besides, the other dragons have likely already discovered this place and may attack at any time. Gulcher glanced at the dragons behind him, and Elle could tell he was deeply conflicted. He knew how important a home was to the dwarves, so Elle wouldn't force them to leave. Instead, he left the decision up to Gulcher. Then, Elle turned to Lorraine, asking if she felt better. Lorraine wiped away the tears from her eyes. Are we really just going to leave that essence behind? Elle reassured Lorraine. Don't worry, I've already cast several powerful defensive spells around it. At this moment, Gulcher was lost in thought. He didn't know what to decide. After all, this place held too many memories. Just then, Ice Soldier brought over several hot, sizzling sausages. This was also the first time Gulcher had seen such food. The soldier explained, these were left by the humans earlier. They were hoping to wait, but they couldn't resist. Seeing the dwarves happily devouring the sausages, Gulcher felt deeply ashamed. It had been so long since he had seen them laugh so joyfully. Have I made the wrong choice? He wondered. This reminded him of what Curad had said before leaving. Back then, he had asked the dwarves, how do you feel about this cramped space? Gulcher hadn't understood Curad's meaning. This place is too small for you, Sir Curad, he had replied. But for us, it's vast, Gulcher had said. Curad had smiled. I really want to know how you've managed all this time. Then, Curad had taken out an essence and handed it to Gulcher. But one day, when I'm gone, you'll become the target of all the dragons. When I die, take the dwarves and leave this place. At the time, Gulcher hadn't understood. Do we really have to abandon you and our homeland? He had asked. Curad had signaled for him not to worry. By then, I'll have turned to dust, Curad had said. Looking at the dwarves, he added, if no one survives to remember me or this place, then everything will have been in vain. Dead men shouldn't stand in the way of the living. My existence wasn't meant for the dwarves to die for. I never expected you to protect the essence. With a final laugh, Curad had departed. Watching the dwarves now smile again, Gulcher finally understood what Curad had meant. He felt deeply sorry. It was his foolishness that had caused so much suffering for everyone. Just as Elle and Lorraine were preparing to leave, a voice stopped them in their tracks. When Elle turned around, he saw the dwarves fully armed. They had made up their minds they would follow Elle and help him build a new dwarven village. The scene shifted. The dwarves had arrived at the cave that Lorraine had dug and solved the problem of building their new home. Elle hadn't expected that as soon as they arrived, the dwarves would start working immediately. Gulcher reassured him. Don't worry, the dwarves haven't been starving, so they're all in good health. He then quietly told Elle, everyone's eager to get more sausages. Elle smiled. I guarantee there will be plenty of food. Then, Gulcher removed the essence ring from his finger because he trusted Elle to lead the dwarves in creating a new home. Looking at the busy dwarves, Lorraine was also excited. The only problem left was this one. Lorraine was puzzled. Are you planning to absorb it? The birth of another dragon king was absolutely forbidden. Elle agreed with Lorraine's view, but there was still an important task left for them to do. Meanwhile, Selena was still tending to her injured thigh, cursing her bad luck. She never expected things would turn out this way. Then, she heard some noise from the distance. Could it be those guys again? But when she looked closer, she realized it wasn't. It was Elle, apparently trying to gather some information. But now there was no need for that anymore. Elle raised an eyebrow. You say you've never received any gifts, but why is your lair full of shiny things? Selena didn't know what she had done to attract these two troublemakers. Elle was suspicious. Did you attack the dwarves? But Selena began to fidget, looking uncomfortable. It turned out that she was Elle's ex-girlfriend. She often came to visit her, which was why Selena had thought it was her ex. This left Elle stunned. Looks like I misunderstood. Selena had only been living here for half a year. She'd never encountered a group of dragons. However, Lorraine was very skeptical. Then what about all these coins on the floor? Selena bit her lip, snapped her fingers, and instantly, the coins disappeared into thin air. So all of this was an illusion? Elle asked, now even more suspicious. Selena could only cry pitifully. If you're still not happy, just take everything away. Scene transition. The two of them returned to the restaurant, only to find that they had learned nothing about the attack on the dwarves. It seems that Selena really wasn't involved. However, Elle was still holding the essence crystal, which likely had something to do with the dragon's plans. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and it was Mr. Mint and Elena. Elle immediately noticed that Mr. Mint's cane was missing. Mr. Mint confirmed, thanks to Elena's help. I'm finally rid of it. Elle then asked about the clinic. Was everything still operating as usual? Elena smiled happily. With Ellen's help, plus many miners helping with security, no one dares to fake illness anymore. Elle knew that Lady Lane was likely involved. Just then, the door swung open again, and Mr. Null walked in, surprised to see everyone there. Looks like the restaurant is as busy as before. Scene shift. Soon, everyone's favorite dishes were served. Mr. Mint eagerly dug into his mushroom pizza, and it seemed Milding would be cooking this for him quite often. Milding blushed at the compliment. Everyone was happily devouring their food. The dwarves were, of course, still chugging down their beers. After a long day of work, Elle finally got a break. But there was one person standing outside the window, hesitant to come in. Dylan. Just as Dylan was about to leave, the door suddenly swung open. Elle had already sensed his presence and was curious. Why aren't you joining us, Dylan? Dylan hesitated. Then, to Elle's surprise, knelt down. I want to make a sweet dessert for my mother. Previously, Dylan had noticed that his mother's mood had been getting worse. He hadn't seen her smile in a long time, and he was worried she might follow. That's why he wanted Elle's help to make something special for her. Scene transition. Elle entered the kitchen of Drake Castle, astonished by its size and the many unexpected ingredients. Soon, he found the items he needed, but when the dish was placed in front of Lady Wiener, she didn't touch it. Instead, she just pushed it aside. Elle was taken aback. This was the first time his cooking had been rejected. After some thought, he realized why when someone is upset, they lose their appetite. Even if the food is perfect, it meant Lady Wiener was troubled. Dylan confirmed, she used to love sweets, but ever since we came to Drake Castle, I haven't seen her smile. At that time, Lyddon, Dylan's father, was also feeling down. Dylan recalled how strict his mother was when he was young. Especially after they arrived at Drake Castle, Lyddon had little time to spend with her since the city was still under construction. Lady Wiener carried a heavy burden, which made her strict with Dylan, but Lyddon just wanted her to be happy. Years passed, and Dylan never learned what made his mother so sad. But then one day, at breakfast, Lyddon noticed that Lady Wiener had finished all of her food. That's when he realized she loved sweets. From that moment on, they kept eating desserts, until no one could look at another piece without feeling full. Eventually, Lady Wiener herself broke the ice. She had had enough of the sweets. That was when she finally smiled again. But not long after, everything changed. Dylan heard loud arguing behind a door one day. Curious, he pressed his ear to it, but before he could hear more, the door swung open and a man stormed out. Dylan was thrown back in shock. The man was none other than the Lord of Didland. Lady Wiener assured him, "Don't worry, he's from Drake Castle." Dylan, still young, didn't pay much attention to it. From that point on, Lady Wiener remained strict, but now there was a smile on her face. Their home finally started to feel like a real family. But that happy time didn't last long. One morning, everything fell apart. Dylan and his mother were still making desserts as usual, but Lady Wiener couldn't get it right. Then, the butler came in with troubling news. The lord of the castle had fallen ill. The sudden news threw them both into confusion. Even the doctor couldn't find a cause for it, and the lord's health continued to decline. Soon, it became hard for Lady Wiener to even feed herself. As Dylan turned to ask his mother about it, he saw the expression that haunted him for the rest of his life: sadness, anger, and helplessness. From that moment on, Lady Wiener refused to eat anything Dylan made. She drew a clear line between them. All their conversations were mediated through the butler, and Dylan was constantly watched. To escape, Dylan ran to a local restaurant, where he eventually met Elle and the others. Was the perfect image of their family now just a distant dream? Scene shift. Elle was filled with confusion. Despite there being many unexplained aspects of the Lord's illness, that didn't mean she had to distance herself from Dylan. Was it because he wasn't her biological son? If that were the issue, she never would have opened her heart to him in the first place. Although her marriage was arranged by her family, it seemed she truly fell in love with the Lord over time. But the secrets involved forced her to distance herself from Dylan. Perhaps this was the only way she could show her love for him. A moment later, Elle rushed to Lorraine's room. Surprising her, Lorraine thought Elle was coming to scold her. Instead, Elle asked strange questions. "If I suddenly collapse and can't speak, would you be sad?" Lorraine answered, "Yes." Then Elle asked, "Would you still want your favorite dessert?" Lorraine was stunned. "I was the one drinking. Why do you sound drunk?" Meanwhile, Wiener was carefully feeding the Lord. Seeing Lyden, who looked like a vegetable, made her lose all light in her eyes. Just then, a voice interrupted her. It was Dylan's butler. Wiener had an uneasy feeling. Soon after, the butler left. As the door closed, a portal appeared. It was Elle and Lorraine. Elle instructed Lorraine to find a way to cure the Lord. Lorraine, after carefully observing, found no clear cause, so Elle looked around the room, searching for clues. Perhaps there was something important hidden in the room. Just then, Elle noticed Lyden made a faint sound like he was trying to hint at something. Following his gaze, they found a piano. After Lorraine searched through the room, she discovered a strange scroll. It seemed like an important document, but when Elle took a look, his face turned pale in shock. It was proof that Wiener had embezzled Drake City's taxes. The document included detailed information on how much tax was misappropriated. It was written by Wiener herself. Elle immediately instructed Lorraine, "We need to go to the Empire's capital and bring someone important back." Meanwhile, Wiener arrived at the room of the Didland Count. Not only was he the lord of Didland City, but he was also Wiener's father. After Elle obtained the evidence of the Didland Count's crimes, he found Dylan. When Dylan saw the document, his face mirrored Elle's shock. It recorded proof that Wiener had stolen the taxes from Drake City, and all the funds had gone to the Didland Count. Dylan now understood why his mother had been avoiding him, but what he didn't understand was who had written the record. Elle then pointed to the signature at the bottom, and Dylan couldn't believe his eyes. It wasn't written by anyone else. It was a confession written by Wiener herself. Dylan didn't understand why she would confess, knowing that if the Empire found out, she'd face the law's punishment. The answer was clear, because the Didland Count had arrived. Meanwhile, Didland, in a cheerful mood, greeted Wiener. But Wiener refused to respond, as she had never considered him as her true father. Although the Count smiled, his smile hid a knife. He quickly changed the subject, saying, "I heard Dylan greeted the prince. Seems like he's a brave kid." Wiener's heart sank, and she had a bad feeling. Didland had been monitoring her every move, and now that he saw Dylan had grown up, he was troubled. Did he plan to turn Dylan into another Lyden? But Didland wasn't asking Wiener's opinion. He was informing her. He had already sent people to take action, and soon, Lyden would meet the same fate as before. Wiener was enraged. She couldn't believe her own father could be so cowardly. Didland's actions were clear to all through his telepathic magic. Wiener had written the confession, knowing it would tie her fate with the Didland Counts, but Dylan couldn't do anything about it. He planned to summon the army to take down Didland, but Elle stopped him. In the current situation, no one would listen to him. And since Wiener was in their hands, Didland wouldn't be foolish enough to carry poison with him. Even if they captured him, it would be hard to prove he poisoned anyone. If they presented this confession, Wiener would be implicated as well. They needed to create new evidence and find someone influential to provide reliable testimony. When Dylan saw Medellin, he was stunned. This was part of Elle's plan. Now, it was time for the show to begin. Scene transition. The next day, Lady Wiener had already been taken under the control of Count Didland. Now, they needed to go to a certain place. But Wiener couldn't understand. She had done everything her father asked. So why couldn't he leave Dylan alone? It made her laugh bitterly. How could he let go of such a huge threat? At first, he had planned to wait until Wiener had air before making his move. But after waiting for so long without any progress, Didland decided to kill everyone and take over Drake City. At this moment, Wiener was desperately begging her father to spare Dylan, but her kind old father refused. Everything was about to come to an end. The moment he saw Dylan's vacant eyes, Wiener's heart was on the verge of collapse. She never expected things to end like this. Meanwhile, a soldier handed the Count a document, and he was very curious. When he saw what was written inside, he broke into a cold sweat. It turned out that Wiener had documented all the embezzlement records, but now it was too late. Didland laughed joyfully, thinking that even heaven was helping him. As long as this evidence disappeared, no one could prove his crimes. In despair, she killed her husband and son, then took her own life. It seemed like a perfect ending to the story. But at that moment, the soldier motioned to the lady. "Don't worry, this isn't the perfect ending you think it is." As the dagger in the soldier's hand was about to strike Dylan, a roaring flame suddenly erupted. At the same time, Medellin broke through the door and took control of the situation. Upon seeing Medellin, Didland realized things weren't going well. Then Dylan slowly got to his feet. "It's over." Seeing Dylan unharmed, Lady Wiener's heart finally settled. When she saw that Dylan, who had been poisoned, suddenly speak, she knew he had fallen into a trap set by several people. At the same time, Medellin gestured for him to give up any futile resistance. Everything was already within reach. Reluctantly, the Count dropped his weapon and tried to explain his crimes. It was all for self-defense, nothing more. But all had already predicted that the old fox wouldn't easily admit to anything. So, she had Medellin make sufficient preparations. She also had the food that Dylan had eaten earlier brought over. "If what you said is true, then finish these leftovers." At this, Didland broke out in a cold sweat, because he knew exactly what was hidden in that food. With trembling hands, he picked up the bread, but in the next moment, he opened everything and revealed Wiener's crimes. Facing death, Didland still tried to drag someone else down with him. "Truly, my old father." But at that moment, Dylan interrupted him, because he had just personally destroyed the evidence. Didland was instantly enraged, his body trembling with fury. "You despicable bastards!" He immediately ordered the soldiers to take action. But ordinary soldiers were no match for a mage, especially when the person in front of them was a 7th-tier Grand Mage. Medellin signaled that there were things that could never be touched. No matter if you were a general, a noble, or even an emperor, everything had come to an end. Meanwhile, on the other side, Duriani had already led the soldiers to surround the Earl's mansion. Anyone who tries to resist will never see the midday sun. In no time, all the soldiers dropped their weapons and surrendered. Even the traitors from Drake were controlled. Didland tried to beg Medellin for mercy, but when Medellin ignored him, he could only rage helplessly. Seeing that things were nearly wrapped up, Al untied Lady Wiener's restraints. Just as he was lost in thought, a voice interrupted him. Dylan stepped forward to ask about his mother's injuries, but Wiener couldn't face him directly. She felt responsible for bringing Drake into such danger, and for trusting Didland's words and embezzling the taxes. Wiener was deeply remorseful for her actions. She begged Dylan not to forgive her. However, Dylan didn't say anything, because he knew this wasn't entirely her fault. But he was angry, because Wiener had kept everything from him. "No matter what, you should have told me what was going on. I believe father would have supported you too, because you are our family. So please, don't lower your head." Wiener hadn't expected that. Her wrong decision had caused Dylan to bear so much alone. Scene change. Didland, still locked up, was cursing angrily at this point. He still wanted to make a comeback, thinking he had backing in the Imperial Palace once he was out. He would eliminate everyone who stood against him. Hearing this, Al told him to stop dreaming, because he no longer had any chances. Upon seeing Al walking in the air, Didland broke into a cold sweat. "Are you a mage sent by the Empire?" he asked, but Elle didn't answer. Instead, she told him to look behind him. The castle, which seemed so fragile to others, was now rising before Didland's eyes. He couldn't believe that such a thing was possible for a human being to do. Meanwhile, with Drake's crisis resolved, Dylan invited all his friends to the Earl's mansion for a long-awaited dessert feast. Lady Rain was eagerly anticipating it, but Mr. Noel seemed to have said something inappropriate. Then, a loud crash was heard. "Luckily, there was no frying pan this time," said Lorraine, laughing. Elena and Lorraine had never seen so many delicious desserts. Even Lady Wiener was equally surprised. Just then, a voice interrupted the group to commemorate the victory of Drake. "We will also have a special performance tonight." Everyone looked up, surprised to their amazement. Didland's castle had floated up into the air with Elle's magic. The castle transformed into a glowing energy orb. Didland's lifelong work was now reduced to nothing. And then, something even more spectacular happened. The castle burst into a magnificent explosion, like fireworks, scattering the darkness in everyone's hearts. Meanwhile, Lady Wiener took a long-awaited bite of a dessert, tears of happiness overflowing. This was the most beautiful banquet she had ever been part of, thanks to Il's help. The Didland affair was quickly brought to an end. Lady Wiener couldn't believe she could eat desserts so freely again. The castle that had imprisoned her heart had been completely destroyed. From now on, she would no longer hide from reality due to guilt. She had something she had been holding on to for a long time. She had thought she would never have the chance to speak it. But now, fate had given her the opportunity to do so. The truth was, she had chosen to marry Lytton because she truly wanted to marry him, not because of any obligation. Meanwhile, on the other side, Didland, after seeing his castle turn into fireworks, felt his heart shatter. All his life's work had gone into it, and for that, he had even forsaken his daughter. At the same time, Durianti had taken care of all the spies in Drake. Curious, he asked if El had brought Medellin along as well. El awkwardly smiled, explaining that in the heat of the moment, it was the only solution. Was there a problem with Count Hilko? At first, Durianti was confused, but when he learned it was El who did it, he fell silent. If he had known there would be fireworks tonight, he probably would have come himself. Durianti was also amazed. He knew El was powerful, but he had no idea she was this terrifying. After tonight, Drake would welcome a much brighter future. The scene shifted to the next day. When El woke up, she was taken aback. The beautiful tomorrow was met with a downpour. Men and Milding were still working hard, but in the next moment, Milding was blown away by the wind. Seeing this, El immediately ordered the two of them to stop working outside because it wasn't suitable to work in such heavy rain. Instead, they could help in the restaurant since there were still many guests. El quickly wiped the rainwater off Lorraine to prevent him from catching a cold. Milding, on the other hand, looked at Mr. Mint with anticipation. Just then, a voice interrupted them. Didn't expect such a beautiful scene in a restaurant. It's truly enviable. It was El's old friend, Wayne. A moment later, a steaming bowl of chicken soup noodles was placed in front of him. In the midst of this storm, being able to enjoy a hot meal might just be one of the happiest things in life. While they were chatting, Lorraine interrupted them, holding a towel and signaling El to help him dry off. Wayne's eyes were filled with complexity, as though hiding many untold stories. He then poured a glass of wine and asked, "Have you ever made a decision you regret for the rest of your life?" El froze at this question. If time could be turned back, what's the one decision you'd never make? The one that haunts you every time you close your eyes, and your heart shatters. You seem to be getting along well with your wife, he added, making El even more puzzled. We're not what you think we are. With the help of the alcohol, Wayne opened up about the story he had kept hidden in his heart. Even when I was alone, I once loved someone. It's been 30 years, but I'll never forget the name Mel. El was taken aback. Since you've loved her for 30 years, why didn't you confess your feelings to her? Wayne smiled wryly. Because I made the most regretful decision of my life. Back then, the two of them were just starting to understand love, thinking that as long as they liked each other, they could be together. But as they grew older and started talking about marriage, Wayne realized that his family had already arranged everything for him. He finally gathered the courage to tell her and arranged to meet her outside the city. But that night, they never met. Out of the blue, a dragon fell from the sky, and faced with this sudden crisis, Wayne ran away in fear. Later, he heard that Mill was safe, but he never had the courage to find her again. He felt like a coward. After telling his story, Wayne placed a few coins on the table, knowing that no one could understand how he felt. Now, he no longer had the courage to even look up, as he feared running into Mill. At that moment, Lorraine pretended to cough and said, "Please take care of your wife over there." Scene transition. El looked at Lorraine, who was fast asleep, and couldn't believe it had already been 150 years. As he snapped back to reality, he realized he had been lost in thought. It seemed he'd need to find out more about the situation tomorrow. The next day, he sought out Mrs. Rain. Upon learning that El was looking for Mill, she seemed pleased. It turned out that Mill and Rain had a very good relationship. But recently, Rain had become anxious and wore a sad expression. She had even asked a strange question. Have you ever made a decision you regret for the rest of your life? All froze at those words. Wasn't that what Mr. Wayne had said? He realized there must be some misunderstanding and decided to find out more about Mill. Mrs. Rain then shared everything she knew with Elle during one of their casual conversations. Mill had immediately noticed that Mrs. Rain was not a local of Drake. She had lived in the city for years, but Mrs. Rain's background was exactly as Elle had described. She and Mr. Noel had come to Drake to escape the war. However, what puzzled Mrs. Rain was why Mill had left Drake 15 years ago. She had always had a person here that she could never forget. 15 years ago, they had been about to meet for the last time, but suddenly, a monstrous dragon had fallen from the sky. Faced with the terrifying dragon, Mill fled the scene. She later learned it from a flower vendor where Wayne had gone. This devastated her. She had never imagined that her fear had caused her to flee, leaving Wayne behind. From that moment on, she couldn't bring herself to face him. Upon hearing the story, I'll piece the events together. Mrs. Rain was shocked by the revelation. She hadn't realized that the Wayne Mill had been talking about was the same Wayne from the orchard. Both of them had gone to the agreed meeting place, but both had run away to avoid the dragon, leaving the other behind for 15 years. They had both lived with regret, believing they had abandoned each other. Mrs. Rain felt that the misunderstanding had been deeply unfair to both of them. They had lived with guilt for so long because of a simple mistake. Al soon thought of a solution. Scene transition. Al found Wayne. He was working in the orchard. The glasses he wore were a gift from Mill. Al had already arranged for Mill to meet him at the place where they had once agreed to meet. Upon hearing this, Wayne immediately grew anxious. Al reminded him, "No one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. But worrying about the same thing repeatedly is another matter. I'm sure you won't make the same mistake twice." That evening, Wayne walked with heavy steps. He was filled with unease, fearing that Mill might not show up, but this was probably his last chance, so he refused to give up. Finally, Wayne arrived at the spot where they had planned to meet. Though 15 years had passed, sometimes a long-awaited reunion is about ending an outdated journey or rekindling a long-buried regret. Both Wayne and Mill carried secrets they wanted to share with each other. Wayne chose not to avoid the situation no matter what. Whether it was an insult or a curse, he had already missed one chance. In the next moment, they both spoke in unison. "I'm sorry for not meeting you earlier." Leaves were blown by the wind as the atmosphere grew slightly awkward. Neither of them had arrived at the meeting place at the agreed time. After learning the truth, they couldn't help but shed tears of happiness. Seeing them back to their old selves, Mrs. Rain felt relieved and happy for them. She also wondered why Elle hadn't told them the truth sooner. Elle explained that it was a simple misunderstanding, and it would be better for them to resolve it themselves. After all, it had been troubling them for 15 years. And so, hand in hand, they returned to Drake City. A few days later, Wayne sold the cherished orchard to Elle, who paid him the highest price. It was clear that Wayne planned to build a new house after hesitating for 15 years. He was determined to have no regrets this time, with the orchard now in his hands. Elle planned to build a village for the dwarfs. Lorien agreed with this idea. She didn't like having so many dwarfs living on her land at that moment. She wanted to invite Elle to stay with her, but didn't know how to ask. However, Elle immediately saw through her thoughts. "Should I live in the dragon nest after the construction is finished?" Lorien was taken aback. "Is that true?" she asked, then quickly added, "You can't back out now." Scene transition. A month had passed, and the construction of the cave was already 70% complete. The dwarves were expected to finish ahead of schedule, but they were still working to pay off the debt to Elle. After all, Elle had built them a new village. At that moment, Milding gestured to Elle because the number of yucca had increased. They now needed to expand a warehouse. Elle agreed, realizing another recruitment drive was in order. Meanwhile, the delicious aroma from the restaurant caught the attention of a brother and sister who hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. They came to the restaurant holding Elle's recruitment poster and asked if they could apply for the job. Elle was puzzled, as the poster was something he had discarded not long ago. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Seeing the two stutter, Elle reassured them not to be nervous. "We're planning to make a new poster anyway. Let's talk while you eat." Scene transition. Considering the cold weather, Elle prepared something warm for them. First, he locked in the beef's flavor with butter. Then in another pan, sautéed onions, garlic, and mushrooms. Once they started changing color, he added tomatoes and potatoes, followed by some spices. He poured beer and let it simmer with the meat. No MSG was needed, as the natural flavors would be the star. But then, Al unconsciously added just a little bit of MSG. After half an hour of slow cooking, the dish was ready. The brother and sister could hardly believe it when they tasted the meat. It had been months since they last had some, and the tenderness of the meat, combined with the rich broth, made them feel warmth spread through their bodies with every bite. They thanked Al, saying it was the best meal they'd ever had in their lives. Al then asked why they wanted to work here. They replied that they both loved animals and were determined to do the job. Al then asked Elena for her opinion. Elena immediately saw that they were hiding something, which made the siblings nervous. Little immediately covered her hand. Al warned them that if they were lying, they would lose their chance at the job. Reluctantly, they unwound the bandages on their hands, revealing marks from prisoner shackles. This made everyone present freeze. "So, you're fugitives," Matt tried to explain but was immediately stopped by Little. She apologized for hiding the truth, but they had no malicious intent. She knew that if Elle hired them, it would cause unnecessary trouble. So they turned to leave, but Matt insisted they tell Elle the truth, as they didn't seem like bad people. Little, however, said that their criminal identity would never change, and though she didn't want to make excuses for their actions, she didn't regret her decisions either. "Don't you regret not finishing the meat?" Elle teased, which caused Little to freeze. She was reminded that under those circumstances, they wouldn't have been able to eat it anyway. Scene transition to evening. Lorien was curious about why they hadn't been hired. Elle knew they seemed to have a story to tell, but unless they cleared things up, he couldn't do anything. Hiring them recklessly might put Men and Milding in a difficult position, so they needed to figure things out first. At this point, Elle noticed that the spices were missing. He placed a gold coin into a magic array, and with his spell, items from the real world appeared before him. But for some reason, he felt unusually tired, different from usual. Before he could react, he lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Lorien panicked, kept calling his name, and Elle soon regained consciousness. Elle reassured him, saying he just drained his magic, but Lorien didn't buy it. "You're a level 9 archmage. How could you be this tired?" she asked, in an effort to let Elle rest. Lorien insisted on handling all the tasks from now on. Elle, feeling relieved, agreed there was indeed something he needed to take care of. But when Lorien suggested making dinner, Elle wondered, how could I let her cook? Scene transition. Back at the restaurant. Despite their best efforts to find a job, the brother and sister were rejected by everyone in the city because of their criminal past. This was why they had gone to the restaurant in the suburbs. They had been through so much and no longer cared about other people's opinions. Nearby, the cat was startled by the siblings. They had taken its food, and Matt felt like they had become true criminals after stealing from the cat. Suddenly, Little froze. Realizing the cat had been crying after losing its meal, Matt instructed his brother to return the plate to the cat. Meanwhile, a man caught the siblings' attention. Scene transition. Having absorbed the energy from the source crystal, Al's magic became interrupted, causing him to feel drained. He knew he had to stop absorbing the source's energy after completing his task. Al lay down to rest, eagerly awaiting the midnight snack Lorien promised to make for him. Though he trusted Lorien's cooking, after all, she had seen him cook for years. Elle couldn't shake the sense that something would go wrong. Lorien worked hard, and after a while, she finally finished her dish, a special tomato scrambled egg. However, when Elle saw it, he realized something was off. It didn't look like a normal tomato scrambled egg. Lorien knew if Elle tried it, he might die right then and there. She quickly thought of a solution. Elena's healing magic should fix it, but the problem was, she couldn't sense Elena's presence, having never smelled her scent. Lorien then thought of another solution. She would go next door to buy a dish from the neighboring restaurant. As she was about to leave, she hesitated. Realizing that Elle had always been the one taking care of her, now she felt powerless. So she knew she had to solve this problem herself. Scene shifts. On the other side, while Little and Matt were having a meal, they spotted Count Latanda in the distance. Of all the times, this guy still wouldn't leave the siblings alone. Little gritted his teeth in anger. He was ready to march over and give Latanda a piece of his mind, but Matt stopped him. If they got caught again, this wouldn't just be a 2-year sentence anymore. 2 years ago, during the construction of Drake City, Count Latanda was in charge of overseeing the project. He was a sleazy, greedy guy who loved to take advantage of workers. He had a thing for picking on them when they weren't looking. One day, while he was flirting with a woman, the roof of building number 3 collapsed on site, trapping several workers under the debris. The woman immediately ran out to check on her family, who were stuck under the rubble. Latanda, however, was furious. He scolded everyone for their incompetence, claiming they couldn't even manage a simple task, but the workers were following strict guidelines. And the columns supporting the roof shouldn't have collapsed. They suspected faulty materials. Latanda, being the jerk he was, immediately ordered Little to be arrested and began beating him up. The workers couldn't do anything to him because of his influence. Matt stepped in, begging for mercy, but Latanda gave him a lewd look. "If you soothe my injured heart, I'll let your sister go." That was the last straw. Little snapped. He broke free and slapped Latanda across the face so hard that his nose immediately turned purple. But that wasn't enough. Even the guards couldn't hold Little back. Furious, he took out all his anger on Latanda. Afterward, the siblings were thrown into prison for 2 years. Matt urged Little to calm down, but Latanda was already livid. Meanwhile, Elna was walking back from Ul's restaurant and happened to run into Latanda. He immediately saw an opportunity. Using the excuse of questioning her, he grabbed Elena before she had a chance to defend herself. Latanda had been to Elena's clinic before, not for treatment, though. But Elena wasn't defenseless. While they weren't paying attention, she quickly cast a spell and escaped. Furious, Latanda decided to show this elf who was boss. As he reached for her again, a punch landed on his face. It was Little. He couldn't stand this scumbag anymore. Matt supported his decision. Looks like they wouldn't have to spend the winter outside after all. But just as the situation seemed under control, Latanda blew his whistle. Everyone immediately realized what was happening. He was calling for backup. 3 thugs appeared in front of them, led by Roman, the leader of the Drake Mafia. Little had no chance against Roman, though he was beaten badly. Little didn't back down. Matt stepped in to help, but the Mafia boss wasn't someone to mess with. With a swift move, Roman restrained him. Latanda smirked and ordered them to teach him a lesson. Even though Elena wanted to help Little, she was powerless to do so. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rain was woken up by strange noises outside. She was confused when she opened the door. She found Lorraine standing there, chatting casually. After their conversation, Lorraine hurried back to the restaurant, but unexpectedly ran into her on the way. At last, Elena saw hope. Roman, now terrified, was trembling all over. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run. He knew that the girl in front of him was extremely dangerous. If he didn't back off, he'd probably die. Before Lorraine could say anything, Roman quickly released Elena. Latanda was bewildered. He looked back at his subordinates, but they were already gone. He didn't expect Lorraine to be so quick. Without hesitation, he tried to grab her and threatened to sell her off, but before he could make a move, his hand twisted around twice, and Latanda screamed in agony. The onlookers froze, terrified, but Lorraine didn't have time for them. Elle was still waiting for her. Scene change. After Elena's healing, Little feels much better, all thanks her. But Elena is drained of all her magic. This guy is like a monster. Lorraine, who had been watching Elena, calls out to her for the first time. This makes Elena a bit embarrassed, but Lorraine still thanks her, leaving both Little and Matt stunned. It's the first time they've ever heard Lorraine thank someone. Meanwhile, Al notices the siblings standing behind the door. They share their story. Latanda was after them, but they ended up dragging others into it. Elle tells them not to feel too guilty, saying Latanda is notorious for cutting corners in construction, but she's curious as to why they didn't explain things sooner. Little admits he knew hitting someone was illegal but doesn't regret it, so he didn't feel the need to explain. Al then pulls out a coin, making Little confused. Congratulations, you two are hired at the farm. Show up tomorrow for work. The siblings are overjoyed and thank her repeatedly. Now, they won't have to worry about going hungry. Scene change. The next day, Little and Matt are in fresh clothes, heading to the farm. Mr. Mint may not like criminals, but even he would have gladly beaten up Latanda. Al's magic has mostly recovered, giving her more control over her powers. As they chat, Al notices Lorraine staring at something. Lorraine is puzzled by the shiny things human women wear, wondering why they do it. Dragons love treasure, but my mom's cave has nothing in it. Al explains that humans wear these things to express their emotions. Lorraine still doesn't get it. Suddenly, Dylan bursts in with great news. Latanda's crimes have been exposed, and he's probably going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The guards also revealed his connections to his boss. Dylan seems like they're all in cahoots. Elle asks Dylan if he's free in 3 days, as she has a secret plan. Dylan agrees to join her. Scene change. 3 days later, Elle visits the dwarves, but not to rush the project. Instead, She brings sausages and beer to celebrate a special day. Mr. Noel and Mrs. Rain are also at Elle's restaurant for the event. Along with other farm workers, Lorraine is curious about the food, asking what's inside those plates. Elle welcomes everyone, saying, "Tonight, I have a fun game for you. Guess what's in your mouth." After explaining the rules, the first contestant is Milding, but when Elle sees what he's eating, she freezes. The game continues. Milding tries the food and guesses candy, but it's actually cotton candy, something that doesn't exist in this world. Next is Mr. Noel. He bites into a chili pepper and instantly becomes a fire-breathing dragon. He's terrified of spice. Mrs. Rain, on the other hand, eats it like it's nothing, causing a lot of laughs. Next is Lorraine. Do I have to join too? Before she can respond, Elle blindfolds her, saying she must participate. Lorraine, feeling confident, thinks, "I'm a black dragon. My senses are better than humans." She guesses it's cake after tasting the soft bread with sweet cream and fruit. Everyone cheers, congratulating Lorraine. Turns out, it's Lorraine's 800th birthday, and she didn't even realize it. She's never had a birthday party before, and Elle's gesture leaves her a bit embarrassed. Elle then pulls out a gift, a custom-made earring from the dwarves. Lorraine is touched but confused. She's never received something like this. Looking in the mirror, she finally gets it. Ah, so this is how humans feel when they get gifts, Lorraine thinks, smiling for the first time in ages. The party continues. Mrs. Rain guesses wrong thanks to Mr. Noel's misleading, and he ends up getting a frying pan to the face. Little's turn comes, but he can't guess either. The night passes with everyone enjoying the game and having fun. As the night winds down, Lorraine thanks Elle again, realizing that this was the last birthday of her coming-of-age ceremony. Meanwhile, snowflakes suddenly began to fall outside the window. Elle invited Lorraine to see the first snowfall of the year. Elle was reflecting on how fast time had passed, but Lorraine was confused. They had only been here for a year. Elle explained that, while a year may seem short to dragons, for humans, it's a long time. Even though he had absorbed the heart of the ancient dragon, no one could guarantee it would extend his lifespan. At that moment, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Elle told Lorraine to make a wish. As the brilliant star lit up the sky, Lorraine quietly made a wish. Elle, curious, asked what Lorraine had wished for, but Lorraine wouldn't tell him. She said that if she spoke the wish, it wouldn't come true. Cut to the Black Dragon Palace. A man stormed through the doors, cursing under his breath. "Uncle, how long are you going to let that arrogant person stay? Does a promise to a human really matter that much?" Nice was known for his rebellious nature among the black dragons. He didn't believe a human could be all that strong. But Elder Dehegma didn't respond. He understood why Nice was angry because of Lorraine. Lorraine had left the dragon clan because they drove her away. Now they wanted to bring Lorraine back, not to treat her well, but because most of the young female dragons had perished in the Dragon Clan War. Elder Dehegma gestured for Nice to speak. Nice flashed a fierce look and said, "If you allow me, I wouldn't mind making things difficult for him." The elder sighed helplessly. Nice had never met Elle, and the great elder would never approve of a black dragon provoking him. But then, Nice thought of a way to cause trouble. Elder Dehegma didn't say much, but it was clear he was on Nice's side. So Nice decided to find a legitimate reason to trouble Elle. Cut to North Pole, Millie Lake Mountain. Lorraine was curious. "Aren't we here to collect something? Why are mushrooms growing in a place like this?" Elle explained that these weren't just any mushrooms, they were incredibly rare. Elle had overheard a conversation at the restaurant about a farmer who, while grazing his cattle, found a hole dug by an akka. The farmer then discovered some black mushrooms, which were later bought by the palace. The farmer received a large sum of gold coins for them. Elle speculated that they weren't mushrooms at all, but likely truffles, or something similar, that grew deep underground, making them hard to find. Lorraine finally understood why Elle had brought him here. "So, I'm the laborer," but Lorraine had no idea what truffles smelled like. Elle was taken aback. After all, Lorraine needed to know the scent to help find them. "Are we going to leave empty-handed?" At that moment, the sounds of a battle caught their attention. A group of goblins were attacking a white snow monster. Although the snow monster was terrified, it was still protecting a cave behind it. Facing the goblins' attack, the monster fought back, but it was outnumbered. Soon, the goblins surrounded it. In a desperate moment, Elle and Lorraine noticed the battle. The goblins were relentless. Lorraine, with a cold murderous intent, caused the goblins to drop their weapons and flee. Elle awkwardly chuckled. These goblins really don't know when to back off. Then, the snow monster leapt forward and bowed to Elle and Lorraine, mumbling something in gratitude. Being a black dragon, Lorraine understood what the snow monster was saying. It wanted to thank Elle for saving its life. Cut to inside the cave. The snow monster hadn't allowed the goblins to enter because there were 2 young snow monsters inside. Elle was curious about what the snow monster had in mind for a gift. Lorraine, with her keen nose, detected a strange scent. The snow monster approached, carrying something black. Lorraine had never seen anything like it before. Can these things actually be eaten? She wondered. But Elle was different. What the snow monster was holding were truffles. Exactly what they had been searching for. Seeing Elle's pleased expression, the snow monster sighed in relief. Lorraine found the smell unpleasant and tossed it aside. Elle was shocked. If the snow monster can find enough truffles, it could be its main food source, meaning there are more truffles here. Elle asked Lorraine to translate something for him. He had come up with a perfect solution. Elle decided to make the snow monster the guardian of Lorraine's underground palace. The snow monster was more than happy to agree, as the cold, desolate land offered little in terms of food, and it also had to care for 2 young ones. The scene shifts to another place. Nice has gathered a few black dragons and is planning to teach Elle a lesson. They soon realize that Nice's actions are motivated by Lorraine after all. He has been searching for a mate for a long time, though he doesn't want to admit it. He believes that dragons should be with dragons with the support of an elder. Nice feels confident. However, some of them are still hesitant because they've signed an agreement that forbids them from attacking humans unless their safety is at risk. The elders have also specifically warned the black dragons to stay away from Elle because he is someone even dragons can't afford to mess with. Just then a voice interrupts them, and the speaker says he has a way to help. He knows a red dragon near Drake, and they can use him to carry out their plan. Scene transition. Selena is sitting on the throne, bored and alone. No one has come to visit her recently, except for the one person who scared her last time. Elle didn't expect her to be so poor, so he didn't plan to take advantage of her. Lorraine directly mocks Selena, calling the place old and shabby, but Selena can't do much about it, as she's poor herself. After mocking her, Lorraine links arms with Elle and leaves. As they now own their own restaurant, Selena wonders when she will see them again. Perhaps she could spend time with them to avoid feeling so lonely. Just then, a voice interrupts her, and a man appears, Selena's ex-boyfriend. Gerd. Selena is not happy to see him, as she had warned him not to come back, but Gerd, with his thick skin, says he wants to start over. If you don't mind, I'm willing to spend the rest of my life with you. Selena knows his behavior all too well. He's here for no good reason. Before Selena can react, a group of black dragons surrounds her. Though she prepares her defense, she's outnumbered. To her surprise, Gerd is on their side. Meanwhile, Gerd takes advantage of Selena's distraction and casts a control spell on her. She becomes furious, and before she can react, Nice strikes her from behind. When the smoke clears, Selena is gone. It turns out she had set up a teleportation array to escape. Gerd panics. If Selena reports them, they're done for, but Nextwood reassures him, telling him not to worry. After checking the location, Nextwood confirms that she has teleported to Drake City, which works in their favor. Then he directs Nice on what to do next. Nice grins. Of course, we'll use someone else's knife to kill if Selena doesn't get medical attention soon. She won't survive the night. All we need to do is frame Elle. Scene transition. Elsewhere, Elle has brought the snow monster family to Lorraine's cave in exchange for their help. Elle gives them truffles as a reward. Lorraine is puzzled because he doesn't know how truffles are used in cooking. The truffles have a strong aroma, and no matter what dish you add them to, they change the flavor, giving it a unique taste. Elle then returns to the restaurant and adds truffles to the dishes. The guests are enjoying the food, except for Lorraine, who finds the taste unpleasant. Elle is stunned. He didn't know Lorraine was a picky eater. He'll have to make a separate meal for her from now on. As evening arrives, and the restaurant is about to close, the doorbell rings. Elle and Lorraine turn around and are surprised to see Selena. Elle is confused because they've never had any dealings with her, but out of courtesy, he serves her a dish. Selena doesn't say much but starts eating on her own. Lorraine, on the other hand, isn't happy. She suspects Selena is here to steal her man. At the same time, Selena notices Lorraine's earrings and proudly mentions that Elle gave them to her, although Selena doesn't say anything. It's clear that she envies Lorraine. Selena admits she doesn't understand what love really is. Is it real, or just a fleeting lie? Then Selena tells them her time is running out. This might be her last dinner. Elle and Lorraine are puzzled, and sure of what she means. Before dying, she just wants to enjoy a good meal. At least she won't die hungry. As Selena removes the illusion spell, the deep wounds on her back are revealed. Selena collapses, and Elle didn't expect this. After Lorraine examines her, she confirms the injuries are too severe. This situation is far from simple. Meanwhile, 3 men suddenly arrived outside Elle's restaurant, and their intentions were anything but friendly. The timing was too coincidental, almost like a well-planned trap. Someone was clearly trying to frame them right now. The most important thing was to save Selena's life. As long as she woke up, everything could be solved. A few crispy-skinned dragons. He didn't even care about them. Elle then peeked out, asking what was going on. But the men seemed to have a clear purpose. They pushed the restaurant door open without hesitation. The blood on the ground reeked of the scent of red dragons. Shouldn't you explain this? Far in the distance, Nice sensed the fight ahead. Victor, the leader of the younger generation, didn't care much about personal gain, but the interests of the group were paramount to him. He would never let the killer of a red dragon go unpunished. In the next moment, a dragon flame shot straight toward Elle, but Elle made no move to dodge it. He simply raised his hand and deflected the attack. Elle didn't want the fight to affect the people nearby, so he suggested they go somewhere less crowded to talk. Meanwhile, a portal appeared at Elena's clinic, and Lorraine hurriedly stepped out. The immediate concern was to treat Selena's wounds, otherwise she would bleed to death. At that moment, Elle found himself in a forest. Needing to stay calm, these people thought he killed Selena, but he needed to figure out the situation. Had they been involved in the framing, or were they just being manipulated by someone else? He had to find a way to get them to talk. Elle told the red dragons to calm down, but when they saw the blood stains from the red dragon in the restaurant, they immediately assumed he had killed one of theirs. So Elle explained everything. The red dragon had already been injured before arriving at his restaurant, and he was trying to save it. Upon hearing this, Victor was taken aback. Then, Garrett suggested they go see Selena, but Elle refused outright. To his surprise, Garrett launched an attack on Elle. Elle knew this was connected to Garrett, and that he was trying to stir things up by claiming Elle wanted to kick Selena out of the nest. Clearly, he was trying to manipulate the others. Victor, under Garrett's influence, shifted into his dragon form. He couldn't tolerate being deceived. Elle knew that explaining at this point wouldn't help. Since that was the case, he might as well teach them a small lesson. Seeing Elle act so arrogantly, all the dragons let loose with their full strength, but Elle only used one hand to block the attacks, causing Victor to drop his jaw in disbelief. He couldn't believe that all the damage was nullified with a single wave of Elle's hand. They were stunned. How could a human possess such power? Just then, other figures appeared in the sky. Nice and the others had been waiting. The red dragons never expected to encounter black dragons here. Upon seeing Nice, Elle seemed to have figured it out. This was likely all his doing. Meanwhile, on another front, despite Selena's continuous treatment, her wounds still couldn't be healed, and her magic power was completely exhausted. Lori knew she couldn't die, so she immediately lent her own magic to her. Whether Elle's innocence could be cleared would depend entirely on her facing the attacks of all the dragons. The most important point is that he believes in Elle's character, but the red dragon elder trusts his own eyes. In the restaurant, there is blood from a red dragon, and Elle's identity is still that of a dragon slayer. At the same time, Garrett jumped out. He claimed to have witnessed Elle kill Selena in the entire process. Nice's uncle immediately saw through this as part of Nice's plan, using the red dragon's hands to frame Elle. Even if others investigated, they wouldn't suspect the black dragons. Seeing how confident they were, Elder Metadana asked Elle if he had anything to say. This left Elle momentarily stunned, as he hadn't said much from the beginning. Elle then pointed out several discrepancies. First, they claimed I killed Selena because her nest was near Drake. Anyone who participated in the Dragon War would know I would never kill a dragon over such a trivial matter. The Dragon Elder agreed with Elle. Next, there's the treaty he signed with the dragons. Unless the dragons maliciously destroy human towns, he wouldn't act recklessly. If it was just about Selena being in Drake City, killing her over that makes no sense. The most important point is how close the black dragons and red dragons have become, as if it had been planned from the start. So you think this whole thing is a trap? Elle then gave a thumbs up. Netadana Elder really understands me, but the Red Dragon Elder still insisted on using evidence. Hearing this, El smiled. How about we let the person involved tell you? When Nice saw the portal, he instantly broke into a cold sweat. The other black dragons were no different. He clearly remembered piercing through Selena's internal organs by all rights. She shouldn't have lasted an hour. Yet here she was, perfectly intact, standing in front of everyone. El knew Elena had provided substantial help, so he thanked her. Selena briefly explained the process, mentioning how Lorraine played a large part. When Lorraine saw Nice, she knew it was her doing. El gestured for Lorraine to stay calm. As he already had a counterplan in mind, El then inquired about Selena's condition. To his surprise, she teased him instead. In the blink of an eye, a punch the size of a sandbag landed on her head. You almost got me killed. El grumbled, rubbing the spot. Do you see the mess I'm in now? At this point, Nice and the others were fuming. They never imagined things would spiral this far out of control. When Selena looked again, Garrett had vanished. She then told them what happened, how 5 of them stormed into her lair and injured her, and if it hadn't been for El, she would have been a corpse by now. The Dragon Elders looked furious. If this wasn't handled right, it could spark a war. Wait, burning with rage, rushed to El and begged for forgiveness. El, seeing his sincerity, didn't make it hard on him after all. He was just a pawn in someone else's game. The others behind Wait started panicking, but the elders weren't interested in their excuses. Meanwhile, Nice, still unrepentant, cursed at himself for not finishing off Selena when he had the chance. It was all El's fault. Without warning, Nice appeared behind El and launched a full-force attack. El wasn't prepared for this. In that critical moment, El shoved Lorraine out of the way, taking the hit square on his back. Nice grinned, enjoying the sight. Lorraine, seeing El fall, froze in shock. She never saw this coming. Elena, too, was horrified. Looking at El's lifeless body, Lorraine felt hopeless but tried to heal him anyway. If El hadn't pushed her out of the way, Lorraine knew it would have been her lying there. Wait, now seeing Nice for what he truly was, couldn't believe it. How could he use such underhanded tactics? But Nice was adamant. I'm saving the dragons, he declared with confidence. Wait shouted, open your eyes, people. Why are we following these foolish agreements? A human thinks he can save the world. He didn't even fight back when we attacked. He just took the blows from all of us. The elders stayed silent, only watching as this drama unfolded. Meanwhile, Elena was still trying to heal El, but it wasn't working. She needed Lorraine's help, but Lorraine was too shaken to focus. Nice, still smirking, mocked them. You stupid elves. Give up, this is all pointless. He's just an ant without a shield. He'll never survive. Selena, unimpressed, sneered. You're going to be disappointed, a coward who only attacks from behind. Pathetic. She urged Lorraine to calm down. El's magic had never weakened. In fact, it was growing stronger by the second. At that moment, Lorraine felt a hand gently wipe away her tears. Then, in the blink of an eye, a huge burst of energy exploded from El's body. Nice, who had been so smug, instantly lost his confidence. Netadana, the elder, felt a chill down his spine. That or he recognized it. It was the energy of the Dragon Clan's primordial crystal. El had planned this all along. He had bet that Nice, being the petty person he was, would strike. Clearly, El had guessed right. He'd been researching the power of the primordial crystal for a long time but never succeeded until now. El knew there had to be a trigger condition, so he took the hit, knowing it would activate the crystal inside him. Now, the crystal was fully integrated with his body. Lorraine, still in shock, couldn't process what just happened. El comforted her with a calm smile. It's over now. Nice, drenched in sweat, was terrified. He never expected a mere human could withstand his sneak attack. Gritting his teeth, he gathered his full power for one last strike, intending to use the primordial energy to end it all, taking El down with him. But El simply raised a hand and caught the attack with ease. You're still too weak, El said, his voice cold. You know the terms of my agreement with the dragons. We are forbidden from killing, kidnapping, or invading other races, unless our lives are directly threatened. El smiled faintly. I'm giving you permission to fight back with everything you've got. With a flick of his wrist, El unleashed his magic. The sky darkened as giant fireballs, the size of meteors, began to fall. Nice stared, stunned. How can a human have this kind of power? But it was too late. The fireballs crashed down, and in an instant, Nice was no more reduced to ashes. When the smoke cleared, the others stood frozen, trembling in fear. L's power was overwhelming. Dragons were nothing in comparison. After everything settled, Al turned to Lorraine and gave her a reassuring smile. We should head home now. Lorraine didn't hesitate. She rushed to him, her relief palpable. Later, Metadana, deeply disappointed in the dragons, locked up the 3 traitors in the deepest cell of the Holy Land for 3,000 years. Selena was richly rewarded because Wait believed they had stolen all of her belongings otherwise. How could she have been in such a pitiful state? Meanwhile, Selena was more focused on Garrett's whereabouts. She wasn't going to let that damn guy off easily. Wait felt the same. The leader of the Red Dragons had been made a fool of by him. Once we catch him, I'll make him pay tenfold. Selena nodded in satisfaction. She had no emotional attachment to Garrett anymore. The restaurant incident had now come to an end. Cut to the next scene. At home, Lorraine was furious. She was not happy with Elle's plan. If Nice had been a bit stronger, you'd be dead right now. Lorraine just couldn't accept it. Seeing this, Elle didn't hesitate. He walked up behind Lorraine and hugged her, apologizing for his actions. This made Lorraine feel a little less angry, but suddenly, a voice startled them both. Back at it again, you old man. Lorraine turned and threw a punch as big as a sandbag. You ruin everything. Al could only laugh awkwardly because it was his fault for bringing the elder here. Metadana, the elder, rubbed his nose in frustration. So, what was the real reason you called me here? Al got straight to the point. It was about the origin crystal. Cut to the next scene. As Lorraine's elder, Al immediately offered the finest wine. The curious elder didn't hesitate and took a sip instantly. He was captivated by its unique flavor. It was fresh, like spring air with the scent of flowers, a mix of different fragrances. It seemed like the wine had been aged for decades, perhaps even 60 or 70 years. Al hadn't expected him to guess it right with just one sip. So, you're an old monster? He thought. Lorraine, intrigued, had never seen this wine before and was curious about the taste, but Al quickly stopped her. This is no ordinary wine. Seeing how close they were, the elder relaxed. Lorraine was definitely happier here than with the dragons. I'll change the subject. What do you think of what happened tonight? He asked, referring to the moment he killed Nice in front of so many dragons. The elder reassured him. Don't worry, it was Nice who started this. You didn't break any agreements. If you hadn't done anything, I would have. The elder then caught on to Al's plan. You knew Nice would attack, so you purposely didn't resist, didn't you? Al didn't deny it. He needed to absorb the origin crystal during the Dragon Wars. He had absorbed 2. Gaining control over the dragons, absorbing 3 would give him the power to rule all dragons. Normally, absorbing 3 would make someone the Dragon King. So Metadana speculated that Al still had more origin crystals. Al confirmed it. That was why he had sought out the elder. Absorbing 3 would turn you into the Dragon King. The elder mused. Once that happens, all remaining crystals would vanish. Metadana then added something important. But there's another thing. Someone is trying to resurrect the Dragon Lord. This sent a shock through Metadana. Lorraine immediately thought back to the incident at the Dwarven Caverns, where a group of dragons had attacked them to steal something. The elder realized this was exactly why Il had absorbed the origin crystals in front of everyone. If they were after the Dragon Lord's resurrection, they were targeting him. So, you're using yourself as bait. The elder concluded. That's a foolish plan. Before he could finish his sentence, a sandbag-sized fist came down hard on his head. The elder had no idea where he went wrong. The scene shifts. As Elena was returning from the market, Selena suddenly appeared behind her. Elena was startled to see her. Turns out, Selena was bored being alone, so she decided to chat with Elena. Since her injuries hadn't fully healed, she considered herself a patient. Before Elena could react, Selena grabbed her and said she was here for a free meal. Elena, blushing, lowered her head, embarrassed. She didn't have any meat here. This scene was witnessed by Mrs. Rain standing outside the door. Her eyes grew as wide as saucers. Meanwhile, Garrett was desperately running away. He was being chased by the red dragons. Just when he thought he was safe, Hitney appeared behind him. She had come to find Garrett. The reason: he hadn't taken the source crystals from the dwarves. To prevent this secret from leaking, Garrett had to die. Seeing this, Garrett quickly explained. Because El had absorbed 3 source crystals, no dragon could defeat him now. Maybe they could figure out a way to trap him, and their plan could still work. Hitney paused, then replied, what you said does make some sense. But you still have to die. A mark appeared on Garrett's neck, and he immediately lost consciousness. Several days later, Noreen came to El's restaurant carrying a large rock. He hadn't seen this before, so he decided to bring it to El. El immediately recognized it as salt rock, a natural mineral salt. Curious, Maureen tasted a bit with her finger, instantly turning herself into a salty dragon jerky. This reminded El of when he first arrived in this world, when he encountered the Dragon Wars and was dragged into the army. At that time, El thought it was all a dream. He thought he'd wake up the next day and return home. But, to his surprise, he stayed in this world. Of course, the most painful thing was something else. The food in this world was terrible. It was just watery broth every day. It wasn't just bad, it had absolutely no taste. He thought he was the only one suffering, but seeing everyone else's reactions, he realized it was the dinner that was the problem. So opening a restaurant became El's biggest dream. To achieve that, he had to constantly improve his abilities to survive. But before that, he had to change the ingredients in this world. Even adding just a little salt would do. Otherwise, he feared he might starve to death before dying on the battlefield. Scene switches to a few days later, at the training camp. The group welcomed their magic instructor, Corsa. This was El's first time seeing magic in action. After a brief explanation from the instructor, they began their first magic exercises since it was their first time working with magic. Many of them couldn't even control the direction of their spells. Corsa was visibly frustrated because, in his eyes, they weren't worth his time. Just then, a massive magic blast shot out from El's hands, and with just one strike, the entire training field was obliterated. El froze, completely unaware of what had just happened as the dust cleared, and their bodies collapsed. Everyone was stunned. Corsa, excited, immediately asked El how he did it. It turned out that El had the ability to see the flow of magic in the air, which shocked Corsa. He quickly sought out the instructor, Kellen, who had noticed El's potential from the start. Kellen had never seen anyone, not even a beginner, who could see the flow of magic. This was a rare talent, and El was undoubtedly a genius. However, people with such abilities were also vulnerable to being targeted by enemies. Therefore, Kellen decided to keep this secret under wraps. Corsa was upset but helpless. Realizing that taking El away with him was no longer an option, he angrily stormed off, muttering, "Don't get cocky just because you learned how to cast Fireball. Clean up the training field first." Scene switches again. El found himself cleaning up the training field alone. He hadn't expected the level 5 instructor to be so harsh. Couldn't he at least show the students some kindness? Thinking back to his childhood, El remembered how his mother would always praise him. Her words were his motivation to keep going, and it was during that time he became passionate about cooking. Suddenly, El noticed something half-transparent on the ground. Curious, he picked it up. It appeared to be a chunk of rock that had fallen from the mountain. Could it be? He wondered, before licking it lightly with his tongue. To his surprise, it was rock salt. With this, he was confident that tomorrow's meal would be a game changer. In the kitchen, he washed some potatoes, peeled them, and added some other ingredients. The broth was prepared separately, and everything was mixed together. A simple potato soup was born. As El took a bite, tears of happiness welled up in his eyes. For the first time, he felt truly alive. The next day, his comrades showed little interest in the usual tasteless food. They had grown numb to it. But when one of them took a bite, his eyes widened in surprise. "This tastes better than usual." "No, it's 10 times better." Soon, everyone was devouring their meals eagerly. El smiled to himself, pleased with the outcome. Just a little salt, and the flavor changes everything. Meanwhile, Kellen sensed something was off. "Did we get a new cook today?" he wondered, but was told everything remained the same. This left him confused. So he went to find El. He knew El had magical talent, but didn't expect him to be such a skilled cook as well, since the kitchen was a restricted area. Most people weren't allowed in, so Kellen was puzzled. El grew nervous. "If that person leaves by 5 o'clock, how could we catch him?" Kellen's words had an implicit warning, making El anxious. Kellen handed El a scroll. "These are some things I've been working on. I was going to discard them, but now I'll leave them to you." As Kellen left, he reminded El, "Just be sure to leave the kitchen before 5, or you'll face punishment." Once El was alone, he unrolled the scroll, only to discover it contained research on edible plants and foods. With Kellen's help, El learned more about the food of this new world. Eventually, The Northern Training Center became famous for its delicious meals. Even after Il's departure, the chefs continued to follow his recipes, and the food maintained its high quality. Soon, Lorraine and the others couldn't wait to try military rations, but when they tasted them, they found them to be quite bland. El also had a bite and felt the same. Maybe it's just the change in environment, he mused. Scene transition. On the other side, when Selena arrived at the elf's clinic, she unexpectedly encountered a pair of crying children. It turned out that the little girl's brother had accidentally hurt himself, but Elena wasn't here at the moment, so Selena suggested, "Just go home and have your parents bandage it up." The little girl then explained that her parents were out working, and no one was at home at this. Elena hesitated. Why does everyone keep pointing out my weaknesses? A moment later, the brother and sister happily walked out of the clinic. Elena learned from them that it was a red-haired sister who had helped them. This left Elena confused. Just then, Selena shouted Elena's name from the door. Elena didn't expect the usually cold and aloof red dragon to have a kind side. This thought made Selena feel all warm and fuzzy. Quickly, Selena changed the subject. "Where have you been?" "I'm starving." It turned out that Selena had just been to the city lord's mansion, trying to solve the duke's problem, but every treatment had failed. Upon hearing this, Selena remembered a dream about researching brain diseases. The only issue was, after all this time, she had forgotten the name of the person in the dream. Meanwhile, a little blue bird with a letter flew to Elena. This was a bird unique to the elven forest. Could something have happened to the elves? But when Elena read the letter, she was utterly shocked. Selena noticed her change in mood and immediately asked, "What's in the letter?" With tears in her eyes, Selena cried, "I might have to become the dragon's bride if they can't find a suitable person. They'll flatten the elven forest. What should I do? I thought marriage was about being with someone you love. Or at least, we could be friends for a while." Selena quickly reassured her, "Don't worry, as long as I'm here, no one will hurt you. I'll punch that arrogant dragon until he cries and runs back to his mom." Scene transition. As the group made their way to the elven forest, Selena angrily questioned Elena, "Don't you trust me? Why did you call them here?" Caught off guard, Elena stammered her explanation. "It's just in case something happens. I was worried you'd get hurt." The conversation quickly escalated into bickering. As they arrived at the forest's entrance, the protective enchantments cast by the elves prevented teleportation, forcing them to proceed on foot. Suddenly, Lorraine tensed, sensing a dangerous aura nearby. Moments later, elven warriors appeared, weapons at the ready. Despite Elena stepping forward to explain, the squad leader remained skeptical. "I'm responsible for the safety of my people. I need proof you mean no harm." El calmly revealed his identity, but another elf stopped the squad leader before things escalated. "I've seen this man somewhere before." The tension eased as the warriors lowered their weapons, apologizing for their caution. "For the safety of the clan, we had to be sure," one of them explained. The group was led to the elven queen, Maria, who immediately recognized El. "It's been a long time, El," she greeted warmly. Even Elena was taken aback. "You know each other?" she asked, and sure why she was surprised considering El's history of pulling off impossible feats. Perhaps it wasn't so shocking. Maria apologized for the trouble caused to Elena, but before she could continue, Selena interrupted, arms crossed. "Why, Elena? Who's the idiot asking for her as a bride?" Maria paled. "Please, don't call him an idiot. He might hear you. He's a noble golden dragon." Lorraine and Selena exchanged glances before releasing their intimidating draconic aura. "And we're not dragons," Lorraine scoffed. "Let's see how noble he is when we send him crawling back to his mother," Selena added with a smirk. Maria froze, her brain short-circuiting for a moment before she snapped to attention. "My deepest apologies. I had no idea I was speaking to such esteemed dragons." Regaining her composure, Maria explained the situation. The golden dragon had long demanded tributes from the elves, but for the last century, he had been silent. Recently, however, he had reappeared, demanding a bride. Lorraine frowned. "Why, Elena?" Maria sighed. "I volunteered myself. Of course it's an honor to sacrifice for my people, but he refused me outright." "Refused you?" Selena's jaw dropped. "He said my hairstyle wasn't his type." Maria admitted bitterly. "He found everyone in the clan unacceptable, so we turned to Elena as our last hope." Selena squinted. "Golden dragon, wait a second. His name sounds familiar." Her eyes lit up with recognition. "That's it. He's the guy who studied brain diseases. He might be able to cure the Duke of Drake." Lorraine sighed. "And your solution is kidnapping?" Nuria hesitated. Be careful, he's cunning. He demands tribute but offers no protection. If he sees another dragon, he'll likely flee immediately. The group exchanged incredulous looks. A cowardly dragon, Loreen scoffed. Guess we'll have to plan carefully. Selena said, I'll act as bait once we trap him in his lair. It's game over. Scene transition. Meanwhile, the golden dragon fumed in his lair, his patience wearing thin. Those insolent elves. They dare defy me. Fine, I'll burn their precious forest to the ground. Descending upon the elven forest, the golden dragon prepared to unleash his fury, only to be stopped by the sight of Nuria leading Elena. As Elena shyly lifted her veil, her delicate beauty seemed to shine like moonlight. The golden dragon's eyes widened, and he blushed furiously. Now this is more like it. Why didn't you bring her sooner? High above, Al and the others observed from the clouds. Just a little longer, Al whispered. Wait until he takes her back to his lair. Sure enough, the dragon whisked Elena away to his cave. Though terrified, Elena steeled herself for the sake of the plan. Inside the lair, the golden dragon eagerly presented her with an outfit, a frilly maid costume. His face flushed bright red as he declared, From now on, you will call me Master. Selena, spying from a distance, nearly burst out laughing. I didn't see this coming. The great golden dragon has that kind of kink.